Precious. We are at a turning point for our oceans. The next 10 years represent a critical opportunity to accelerate international efforts and achieve the goal of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. That's why this year's State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture report is focused on. The report highlights major trends in global fisheries and aquaculture and also scans the horizon for new and emerging strategies to better manage aquatic resources sustainably into the future. The sector is at the core of Sustainable Development Goal 14, which calls for the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Progress is being achieved, but challenges remain. While 65.8% of fish stocks are harvested sustainably, the remaining 34.2% are overfished. Fisheries management is therefore more crucial than ever. Totaling 179 million tons, fisheries alone reached 96.4 million tons, while aquaculture production reached 82.1 million tons, or even more if you include aquatic algae. This is good news for the billions of people who rely on fish as a primary source of protein, and the millions who earn their livelihood working in fisheries and aquaculture. Women play an important role in this labor force, especially in the post-harvest sector. Beyond the nutrition and employment benefits, fish has also become one of the most traded commodities in the world in recent decades, with developing countries taking on an increasingly important role in this arena. As such, fisheries and aquaculture have an indispensable function in society that we simply cannot take for granted. The world must work together to ensure that the generations to come can continue to access this vital source of nutrition and employment, especially as the population continues to grow and global production continues to intensify.
Muchos no saben que en la actualidad el sector pesquero artesanal es una de las áreas.
The artisanal sector is one of the most vulnerable areas when faced with the increase of temperature, frequent increased storms. All of this, which affects the communities that depend on the extraction and sale of these products. It is because of this situation that we feel the need to implement adaptation measures in the artisanal and fisheries to minimize the negative impacts that affect sustainability, levels of employment and income of the people. That's why the project on strengthening adaptive capacity in the Chilean fisheries and aquaculture sector to climate change to strengthen the institutional capabilities and public capabilities. Two, to improve the adaptation capability of artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture. And third, to strengthen the knowledge and sensitivity about climate change in the fishing communities and aquaculture communities. This is how we will provide proven answers in terms of how to face climate change through the strengthening of the institutional arrangement locally, regionally, and nationally. Training programs in fisheries and aquaculture, production diversification, and sustainable tourism strategies, and the introduction of added value to fishing commodities. Our challenge is for installed capacity to face climate change through the different programs will have an impact at the level of public policy so that they are sustainable in time and that they become safe tools in order to add continuity to the different initiatives that are driven by the project in the pilot fishermen coves of Riquel, Moco, Yumo, El Manzano in Walaiwe, and also that are an example nationally and a stimulus so that other fishermen's coves also implement sustainable measures for adaptation to climate change.
Hola, ¿cómo están, señoras y señores, autoridades
Good
presentes?
morning, everyone. Please be welcome. My name is Camila Pizarro. I'm a journalist at the communications section of the Undersecretaries of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and on behalf of the GIF-FAO, strengthening the adaptive capacity of the Chilean fisheries and aquaculture sector to climate change, please accept our warmest welcome to the closing seminar, Lessons Learned and Opportunities for Adaptation to Climate Change. We're grateful for the support that this project has received from public and private institutions, from the coastal communities, researchers, academics, and civil society, and to all those who have joined us in this seminar, of which we are so very proud. We would like to especially greet the participants at the regional and community level who have led, supported, and accompanied each initiative developed by the pilot tests, to the zonal directors of fisheries and aquaculture, to the SEREMIs of the environment and their work teams, to the regional and local offices of Pesca, to the regional governments, to the municipalities, to high schools and schools, to neighborhood councils, and of course, to the organizations of artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture who have actively participated, achieving that each one of the initiatives developed in the pilot sites have been successful. To the regional governments, municipalities. Next, the Undersecretary of Fisheries, Alicia Gallardo Lagno, will address the audience and welcome us to this activity. Good morning, Undersecretary. Thank you, Camila. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to greet Paulina Sandoval, who is the Undersecretary of the Environment, and the Undersecretary with whom we have enjoyed this project, although we have come at the end, at the tail end of the actions that have been implemented for quite a while. We believe, both environment and the Undersecretariat, that this is the way to face climate change. How do we get ready, both in terms of fisheries and aquaculture, to learn from what's happening and to establish different action plans? Let's remember that the sea is a source of food that is so very important, and also livelihoods. And for aquaculture and for fisheries, if you consider statistics, fisheries, 90% of the fisheries in the world is small-scale fisheries, is small fishermen. And 80% of aquaculture in the world account for small-scale production as well. So it is the most vulnerable population that we need to learn from them first, from their wisdom, ancient wisdom. And that's why this project is so valuable, as Camila said, because it did consider the participation of communities, of the fishermen and fisherwomen, and it also forced us as public institutions to build bridges and to build a virtuous community to make progress. The sea is what breathes life into future generations. The sea is very important for regulating climate. It is also very important as a source of oxygen and as a source of biodiversity. Therefore, our action in this project contributed undoubtedly to establishing different ways of adapting and resilience capability, discussion capability, and also sitting at a table and jointly to share a territory. The Colyumo Cove is different from the Coquimbo Cove. And that's extremely valuable because the diversity in our country is very important to consider in public policy. As an Undersecretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture, I'm really thankful for this project, for FAO's effort, and all public servants that participated, all communities, all the organizations and experts that supported us. And maybe we're already late because climate change is progressing significantly. So the invitation is to not stop, to keep on building resilience, to keep developing the listening capability, discussion, and also respecting the wisdom of our artisanal fishermen and fisherwomen who have a lot to say, and we have a lot to learn from them. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great seminar. Thank you very much, Undersecretary. Now we will hear the Undersecretary of the Environment, the Deputy Undersecretary of the Environment, Paulina Sandoval, who will address us. Please be welcome. Yes, good morning, everyone, especially the Undersecretary of the Fisheries and Aquaculture, FAO, and all the professionals of the Ministry of the Environment, because of the work we all do for reducing vulnerability and increasing adaptive capability of the artisanal aquaculture and fisheries sector. The private sector is a key in terms of adaptation to climate change, and that's why we have increased our efforts to achieve joint work in order to generate data and tools that will allow us to better assess the risks and make decisions well informed. Among the adaptive policies, we find the adaptation sectorial programs, although public require a fundamental support from the private sector and their effective participation in the implementation, such as the production sector, protection, fisheries, aquaculture, energy, tourism, and the future plans. This project of strengthening capabilities, 4 pilot coves have been implemented: Riquelme in Tarapacá, Tongoy, Coquimbo, Coliumo in Biobío, and Manzano. And the results have benefited the artisanal fishermen. 7 groups have been formed. This is the interpreter speaking. The audio is breaking up severely. We'll do our best. We have made progress in environmental monitoring programs with 147 partners have been trained in adaptive courses to climate change, which shows the relevance. All of this additional to specific climate change adaptation practices such as theme, maps, the special interest tourism, added value products, experimental culture of mollusks, and also generation of support, dissemination, and communication material. In this context, the purpose of this seminar is to disseminate risks about to climate change and some essential measures of adaptation in the sector, as well as commenting the national efforts in terms of public policy to adapt to climate change and the association with the oceans, fisheries, and aquaculture. It is of special relevance to highlight that all climate change policies have been subject to consultation and community participation process with participation of the private sector to enrich them with the involvement of all stakeholders. Besides, we should not forget that Chile is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change because we cover 7 of the 9 vulnerability criteria of UN. Climate change has a strong impact on the private sector and the most vulnerable sectors of our country. The main initiatives in terms of climate action that we are driving are the following. First, climate change bill that establishes carbon neutrality by 2050, according to most advanced legislations in the world that currently are discussed in Parliament. Also establishing the general adaptation framework faced by the private and public sector. Our contribution on DC that considers several commitments, such as more information and management mechanisms in terms of impacts of climate change on water resources. For example, in 2025, at the national level, and that allows us to do a follow-up of water scarcity in achieving. Likewise, by 2030, catchment plans have been developed for more than 150 catchments in the country have been developed. The idea is to implement a disaster risk prevention plan, especially those derived from climate change. We have developed a climate change atlas to develop a set of risk maps associated to climate change in Chile with national coverage and at a community level, becoming a very important tool for the design of public policy and the implementation of the best adaptation measures. Likewise, we're developing long-term strategies to achieve carbon neutrality and resilience by 2050. And this entailed a participatory process between April and October last year, and that is currently undergoing a formal community discussion. Likewise, this year, 2021, we are going to start the update of our national adaptation program so that it is aligned with the long-term climate strategy. We have a financial strategy to face climate change that defines the financing pillars. Likewise, we have the national plan for climate change, including mitigation, adaptation, implementation, and regional and local climate change management. In the regions, we have developed 4 regional plans that we submitted in 2020, committing that by 2030, all regions in the country will have this type of plan. Among the adaptation plans, we have the sectorial adaptation programs. As I said, they require for an effective implementation. Finally, allow me to wish you the best success. This is going to be of great help for all those who are going to be joining us during this very necessary presentations.
Muchas gracias. Agradecemos las palabras de la
I'd
subsecretaria.
like to thank Mrs. Sandoval for her remarks and invite the FAO representative in Chile, Mrs. Eve Crowley, who will introduce us to the general context of the project. Welcome, Eve. Hi, thank you, Camila. Good morning to all the attendees. Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. A special greeting to Alicia Gallardo Laño, Undersecretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and Paulina Sandoval, Acting Undersecretary of the Environment. Greeting also to the beneficiaries, recipients of the project, regional local authorities, Paula Gonzalez, the Regional Secretary of Environment of the Tarapacá region, Freddy Bacache, Mayor of the Municipality of Gualeguay, and to the international speakers and professionals who will participate in this meeting. Carola, Ruben, Maritza, Pepe, Roberto, and each and every one of our colleagues and friends. Although this seminar is part of the final phase of a very important project that began 4 years ago, I don't believe this is the end of a stage, but the beginning and the basis of many important future actions for adaptation to climate change in artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture in Chile. Thus, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude and that of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to each one of the staff and teams of public agencies, academia, municipalities, civil society, fishermen, and fish farmers of Chile, who from the outset have supported the activities of the project with great commitment and have worked for its projection, dissemination, and sustainability. Climate change is a reality for the entire planet, and Chile is no exception. As Paulina said, the country has a high degree of vulnerability to this global phenomenon. The artisanal fishing sector and small-scale aquaculture are considered the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, which, added to the overexploitation of species, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and the degradation and pollution of the marine habitat, highlights the urgent need to take concrete actions in the short term for those working in the sector. In this scenario, I believe it's crystal clear the adaptation to climate change is fundamental for the sustainable development of fisheries and agriculture in Chile. Experience both in the design and implementation of the project has taught us and demonstrated that facing the consequences of climate change requires the participation of local communities, community governments, and the scientific world in order to safeguard the livelihoods of those who live along the coasts and those who depend on seafood products. Coastal communities involved in fishing and aquaculture in Chile are facing various effects of climate change. Name a few: the reduction of the available and accessibility of many marine species due to relocation or migration in search of better conditions for their development. Therefore, the main objective of the project has been to generate actions and install adaptation capabilities at national, regional, and local levels with a gender focus. Thus, allow me to mention some of the areas that seem important to me as part of the results achieved jointly for strengthening Chile's institutional framework for the artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture sector. First, thanks to the project, the capabilities of public officials, decision makers, women and men in artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture were strengthened. I'd like to emphasize the adaptation practices developed by the project included the active participation of women in training and field experiences. By strengthening the integration of women in the various project activities and promoting their involvement in the organizations, it is expected that the number of women involved in the various local production chains will actually increase. Second, the the preparation of a set of very valuable documents available for sharing with other coves in the country, including training manuals, environmental monitoring, and adaptation practices should be highlighted. Clearly, the experience and outputs generated by the project are a platform for the sustainability and replicability of these initiatives in other coastal communities, not only in Chile, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean and other regions. Finally, I would like to highlight the creation of the interoperable information system that integrates data on fisheries, aquaculture, and climate change, which is so important for making good decisions. We need to continue working on close coordination to strengthen initiatives that generate the necessary capabilities to make artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture more resilient. You can always count on FAO and all its staff to help you in your efforts to make artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture more resilient. We'll be sharing the challenges in order to build a strategy of sustainability of the actions developed. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank the representative of FAO in Chile. And the agenda for today consists of two parts. The first will give us an overview of the problems related to climate change and the importance of climate change adaptation processes. We will learn what were the lessons learned from the project and the opportunities to formulate public policies to better address the changes that coastal communities are facing. In the second half, we will have the experiences of the project recipients. We will learn about the lessons learned during its implementation and those practices that will allow them to become more resilient communities in the future. At the end of each of these blocks, there will be time for questions to the panel members. Those questions that cannot be answered at the time will be compiled by the project team and will be sent to your email addresses. I would like to remind you that this seminar is being streamed on the FAO.org Americas platforms and will be available in FAO's YouTube channel so that it can be reviewed. It is important to note that the project ends on June 30th of this year. 15 days. But the work must continue. All of you who are accompanying us in this instance are considered key stakeholders to continue strengthening the instances of adaptation of coastal communities to climate change. Next, Mrs. Doris Soto, Senior Researcher of the Interdisciplinary Center of Aquaculture Research, INCAR, will begin the round of presentations by introducing us to the risks of climate change in Chile's artisanal fisheries and aquaculture and some essential adaptation measures in the sector. Welcome, Doris, and good morning. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to this event. Greetings to all of you. In a way, I'm supporting this initiative, or I've been supporting this initiative for many years when we began discussing strengthening communities in aquaculture and fishing communities. So I'm pleased to be here. Let me offer a review, a brief review on how we assess risks of climate change for fishing and aquaculture. First, this chart shows the last report of the climate global status 2020, showing 5 databases monitoring temperature of the atmosphere. Really an interesting thing that help us as scientists and see that there is a quite consistency in those databases. The information is quite robust. And an interesting point that we always thought that by 2015, 2016 were the hottest when we had this last El Nino. But in 2020, we reached peak levels again. That clearly is a matter of concern. So let me underline here 2 things. Robust information, good database. It's not enough though, and the information, the trend is quite clear. What I mean by this presentation is the drivers of climate change are not simple, especially in the ocean. The interaction among these drivers is complex and difficult to predict. This is by René Garreau, CR2, showing the historic condition. This is Chile from south to north. Before 1980, there are several elements here of climate drivers that are important, such as troposphere, the low-level west winds, which were causing our climate 20 to 30 years, especially down south, which was very rainy. But the weakening of the ozone layer and the tropospheric warming has led changes that are hard to understand. This has been an intensified low pressure in the central south of Chile. There are pressures above the normal with a greater stability, less rain. Another phenomena is the increase in the southern winds that force more surges and cooling of the coastline. So what happens locally, it's not easily to predict. Those local monitoring systems are so important. You have probably seen this image. This database is 2015, but it's easier to show. We know there are several elements which are related to these increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. It's an increase in the ocean surface temperature. Prediction models show that we're going into the most dangerous, which are at CP 8.5. The sea level is increasing, reduction of pH. This is the acidification of ocean because of more CO2 dissolution in the water, a reduction in oxygen content, the more frequency of hypoxic zones, and can see it here. But for us, precipitation, raining decrease is really important in Chile for fishing and aquaculture. And here we have this various impact, but we have one here which is extremely important. That's where we first have to start with adaptation measures. Poor management of resources, fisheries, will increase the impact because places our resources in a more exposed position, which is key. Fishing and aquaculture communities are quite vulnerable to climate change. I always show these two pictures. I worked in Bangladesh, where women and farmers would lose the ability to fish, and lose fish production due to floods. And this is Karel Mapu during El Nino in 2016, when we had this big tide and they couldn't fish, and there was this social crisis. It is key to understand and assess risk and vulnerabilities. We need to know the threat, the potential enemies. Sometimes we get confused. We had the opportunity to work in this initiative, the Atlas of Climate Risk, which is an open platform. Everyone has access to it. And this is a risk for several important sectors in Chile, among them aquaculture and fisheries. This is a Ministry of the Environment initiative with several organizations, with several important things. On the one hand, puts together relevant information, but also as an open platform is extremely uh, useful and plays around. It allows us to understand the meaning behind the data. We have two reports and databases. One is coastal fishing or artisanal fishing. And this is, again, by a group of people, colleagues from the Universidad de Concepción. This is the link, the hot link for the platform. What we do here is review the risks for artisanal fishing along Chile. As you know, in Chile is an extremely long country. Artisanal fishing in 2019 provided 55% to the total fishing, nearly 1.2 million tons. And the total landing of artisanal fishing, at least 16% around shoreline collection, where women play a major role. And these had some strengths, but also some vulnerabilities, which are not easy to understand and that need to be addressed. This risk approach uses a model which is a revision of the IPCC 2014 model, which is quite simple but allows us to work in a participatory manner. The risk here is the consequence of three components. In the impact chain dealing with threats, an increase in water temperature, which take the target resource away, or a decrease in rainfall could reduce the land availability in the benthic resources. The exposure, biomass in products per coves, which can be lost. And these, which is the most important, is the sensitivity or susceptibility, those management of resources aspects that will make them more fragile or sensitive. An overfished fishery will be more fragile. But the methodology, and let me address only a few elements. Everything can be seen in the report in the web platform. We use 370 cove data. This is the database of Pesca of artisanal coves in Chile. We basically work with the two variables which were easier. Besides, those are the variables which were identified as more relevant. The increase in temperature in the atmosphere, which could affect the ocean, and reduction in rainfall along Chile. So we used two indicators, and for that we worked with a digital climate database using the project and the forecast for the next 50 years of DR2. For exposure, we use the biomass, tons that may be lost, and broken down into the most important groups. For sensitivity, we use several indicators: the number of fishermen, resource availability, trends of fishing, the concentration index on one or more resources. What we see here on the top is the distribution of threats. What we can see here is, towards the north, there is a atmosphere temperature increase. That not necessarily means that the ocean temperature will increase because of winds. As I said, there may be a cooling down. What matters is that there is a change in temperature. And the second element is that towards the central and the northern Patagonia, there is a decrease in the rainfall, unlike the southernmost area. That's the forcing agents and then the threats, and we figure out the total average risk for all the throughout Chile coast, and then risks dealing with temperature and rainfall. To understand how these problems will be addressed, this is just the first step. An interesting point here. This is a simple diagram of risk for all the coves along Chile, and when we use all the resources, including algae, risks are higher in the north, in northern Chile. When we only use risk for fish and invertebrate, risks are concentrated in region 10 and further south. This is also true in the number of coves with higher risk in the different regions of the country. And clearly, that is a function of the fishing volume of resources and the exploitation status. So we're learning a couple of interesting things here. We didn't do a forecast for the increased acidity because we don't have clear models along Chile, but we did run a simple simulation, assuming that there is a reduction in the pH, the increase in acidity, and then we found higher risk for invertebrate in crustaceans and mollusks in the north and in the south. These are widely affected by the volume of these products. So clearly, for acidity, we have to these two areas should receive more attention. Risk maps are really interesting. You can see there all three components: threat, how the threat is distributed, the areas with the greatest threat, exposure, accounting for the biomass which are being fished in each cove, and sensitivity. So how, I mean, you see the circles to see each one of the elements, and some coves have more risks, show more risks than others. This is to emphasize this is a cove with a number. This is a relative comparative indicator of risk, but with different characteristics. A number of fishermen, in this case, is 1, which is a very high number. They go between 0 and 1. And the resource of fishing, they all have a severe overexploitation difficulty, degree of concentration on one or more resources. So the important thing of this analysis is that we have to understand that we can change some of these elements and reduce risk. For instance, diversification of fishing and associated activities, and also improving management of fishing resources, thereby reducing the exploitation index. For aquaculture, we did something similar. This is a big group of researchers and from different organizations, and here, basically, let me show you what we did in this area where that's 97% of the mussel production, mussel culture. This is an opportunity to understand what happens in fishing. As you know, the mussel production is based on the collection of seeds from the free environment. This is some sort of fishing. So we capture the seeds produced naturally. These are taken to growing systems in other places. So it allows us to understand these two sectors, and we understand that we have to see this in a comprehensive way. It's really difficult because most of the seeds are collected in the fjords, Walaiwe, Reloncaví, and these are grown from Calbuco down to Chiloé. Therefore, the risks for each sector is a function of demand. Without demand, no one will buy our seeds. So if something happens to growth, seeds will be affected. Other risks that will expose the people working on this business without work. So an integrated analysis at the community level, but we have to see the integration of the sector. This is difficult and challenging. We're still working on this. To show you how difficult these could be, and for that we need information and research. In this case, for seeds, according to the forecasts of climate change, clearly the Patagonian fjords are already receiving less fresh water, and this trend will increase. The presence of fresh water in the fjords is really important in order to keep these natural collections of Mytilus chilensis, and in the upper part, with the less salinity, there's an ideal solution. We have a bigger species and predators at the bottom. These, if we have less fresh water, we have seen that Mytilus will continue to grow, predators and other larvae and seeds, and there will be a reduction in the collection of seeds. There are some hydrodynamic effects into the estuaries, and it's affecting availability of seeds. So we worked again with the risk analysis for aquaculture and impact chain, which relates to the reduction of precipitation or rainfall, which this effect I've already explained. But also, when we have less days of rain, we have more days of light, sunlight, and that may cause a red tide. The exposure to biomass that may be lost and susceptibility are those management actions such as high density of production, excessive pressure on the different seed collection sites. This is a risk matrix similar to what we have seen already here. Sensitivity, we're working with several indicators such as dependence of fresh water, and we're working on the indicators for fishing condition of natural sites, which is important for any culture based on natural seeds. And the seed management condition. This is really critical because today we figure nearly 70 or 80% of the seeds initially collected when harvesting, this has been lost. So there is a loss for the ecosystem and a pressure on the natural side, besides an economic loss. So that's the type of things we have to look at. Well, this is a view of the different sites in the no, this is a view of the map where you can see the threats and how the biggest threat, the darker it's in the northern section. The exposure, the big concentration of seed collection in few ecosystems, sensitivity showing all those aspects which I've already mentioned, and risk showing here, for instance, that overall risk is highly concentrated in between Cochamo and Walaiwe, which is where we have seed collection. Components of sensitivity can be also analyzed, have to do with the concentration of collection systems. When we have a high concentration, there might be several problems. The condition of the seed stocks, whether being exploded or not, the seed management, and the influence of fresh water ingress. We also run a risk analysis of losing biomass due to an increase in the tide. And this is the risk is in these communities in southern Chiloé, Calbuco, and also relates to sensitivity and this threat, which is still advancing. What can we learn from these analysis? We have to understand that clearly we cannot change threats, the climate trends from the sector. We can do things to mitigate the greenhouse effect gases emissions, but in general, in the coming next year, we will not be able to do anything against that threat. We can prevent impacts. We can maybe reduce exposure, and above all, we should try to reduce sensitivity. And that means better planning, best practices on fishing and aquaculture. Those are the first critical measures for adaptation. We run a model using the data available, but this project is going into a second phase funded by the United Nations Development Program. We'll be working with COVES on adaptation. And what we basically do for seeds, we can reduce the risk by improving the condition of stocks and the efficiency in the collection of seeds by reducing loss of seeds. For riptide, algae blooming, what we do is it's a redistribution of space. We can have if we concentrate, there is a higher risk. So what we do here, this is the better spatial distribution, more strategic in nature, considering risk, and a better management of resources. And in closing, let me emphasize the importance of knowledge and information. We have to establish the risk. We have to know and identify threats in order to design adaptation. We need to know what could be the problem. We could have adaptation measures that will make any sector more resilient. That's also important. But it's also good to know our potential enemies, knowing the threats. So knowledge, the monitoring systems, education are critical. Acknowledging that the best practices and management resources will help us reduce sensitivity. This is a win-win when you improve practices and fishing practices. And whenever possible, review the spatial distribution of fishing and aquaculture in order to reduce exposure. Finally, information on fishing and aquaculture. Without information, distribution, aquaculture production, the number of fishermen, and the status of resources, we could not set what are the comparative risks to focus our efforts. We're very grateful for the huge amount of information collected by the Cernapesca. The databases in Chile are amazing compared to other places in the world. But the first resource here is information. So let me close in saying that we're very grateful of this effort made in order to collect information. We have to continue with this effort to have easily accessible information, and this is a huge tool. And with that, let me close my presentation. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos a Doris Soto por su
We'd like to thank Doris Soto for her presentation, and we'd like to welcome Carolina Urbeneta. She's the head of the Climate Change Office of the Ministry of the Environment, who will speak about the national efforts in public policy for climate change adaptation and its link with the ocean, fisheries, and aquaculture. Good morning, Carolina. Please be welcome. Thank you, Camila. Thank you, Paulina, the acting undersecretary, FAO people, and everyone who's connected, and all those of us presenting. After this massive talk by Doris, I'm going to talk about the framework of the climate policy in Chile and how this, very much connected with what Doris said, is being developed in line with the oceans, fisheries, and coastal areas to make progress, as Doris said, with measures that can be as specific as possible. Okay, first, I'd like to tell you that in Chile, we have this Climate Change Framework Act that is being discussed with urgency. It started to be discussed in January 2020 in Parliament, and in August of 2020, it was adopted unanimously. Now, the specifics are being discussed, as Paulina Sandoval expressed. And we are concluding this first stage in which the carbon neutrality mechanics and mechanisms are making progress in adaptation indicators in terms of water security, and long-term, medium-term, and short-term management instruments are established. And I'm going to tell you about this contribution, the adaptation program of the fisheries and aquaculture sector, and also we have the long-term climate agenda. This establishes the introduction of climate change in other policies, especially of territorial organization and funding instruments, information systems in the institutional arrangement of climate change. As to the instruments for climate change, what we want, Chile's vision, as science asks, is to reach carbon neutrality and resilience in the year 2050. For that, we have nationally determined contributions that we submitted in April last year to the United Nations Framework Commission, thinking of this long-term goal of 2050 with intermediate goals between 2020 and 2030. And we're working now on our long-term strategic approach that is in community consultation, but now citizens participation process now, and it talks about how we're going to make progress at sectorial and territorial levels to achieve these goals, this great goal by 2050 and this intermediate goals between 2020 and 2030. The climate change bill considers many of these instruments that already exist. It needs a mitigation adaptation process in which aquaculture and the fisheries sector, as we saw in Doris' presentation, is a key sector. Also, it establishes the obligation of having regional action plans for each one of the territories. We're working on four specific pilots: O'Higgins, Los Ríos, and Los Lagos in Atacama, and community action plans. They are developed by regional committees for climate change, COREC, and community action plans that are developed by the municipalities. As we know, Chile updated its nationally determined contribution, NDC, in April 2020 that establishes all our intermediate goals until 2030. And I should highlight that this mitigation is a key important, and also there's a new integration component in which oceans, as Doris said, are very important for a country such as Chile, where we have 4,000 kilometers of coastal areas. These are all the commitments established in this NDC are mandated and permeated by a social dimension that focuses on fair transition, especially for the decarbonization process, and also how each one of these commitments contributes to the Sustainable Development Goals. What we're looking for with this climate policy is to connect how we are going to strive to achieve much better climate and environmental benefits with social benefits that actually cover the communities in the different territories. As to adaptation itself, Chile has a national adaptation plan to climate change that was prepared back in 2014. This plan at the time was positioned as an articulating tool of the Chilean public policy of climate change adaptation, and everything that has been made until 2019, 80% progress had been achieved, and this year we're going to deliver the level of progress by 2020. This plan allowed us to generate the basis and the concrete work that is recognized and is strengthened in this Climate Change Framework Act that I was telling you about at the beginning. This plan consists of 26 action lines across the board in terms of research, communication, environmental education, institutional strengthening, and disaster risk reduction, and also includes the adaptation plan for fisheries and aquaculture. how are we making progress in this adaptation plan? As I said, we have an 80% progress today. And what we have done is to do an external assessment. These are some of the results, preliminary results of this external assessment, telling us that the program specifically covers the actual needs of the country in terms of adaptation. It is aligned and is consistent with international commitments in terms of adaptation to climate change. And in terms of its budget, the public services show a proportional or correspondence between the expenditure incurred and the progress of the implementation. That would clearly have challenges. Challenges, for example, that measures should be much more detailed in terms of implementation and results, with indicators and clear parameters, that we should have a progress reportability system that allows us to standardize the progress in adaptation nationwide, considering the different territories and sectors, with an indicators system that would allow us to implement corrective actions in case of deviations, so that we are able to mobilize more financial and human resources. Clearly, all these challenges have to do with what Doris said, the availability of information in order to make this progress. So what are we doing now? Our NDC commits to the development of this climate change national plan. We hope to have it ready by 2022. And for that, we're working with funding from the Green Climate Fund in order to make progress in this case. In order to strengthen the public and private cooperation schemes in adaptation, monitoring and reportability systems, to improve and strengthen the financial strategy associated to adaptation, with guidelines in order to include adaptation plans in terms of integrated management of risks, nature-based solutions of water security and gender, and also participatory processes that will allow us to introduce the improvements in terms of governance and defining priorities and adaptation solutions to consider in this new adaptation plan. In Chile, we have the climate change adaptation plan for fisheries and aquaculture, which was adopted by the Council of Ministers in 2015. And its main objective was to strengthen the adaptation capability of the fisheries and aquaculture sector to challenges and opportunity of climate change, considering a precautionary and ecosystemic approach. This plan by 2019 has achieved 71% of progress. So we have made progress in the 29 measures around 5 specific objectives. And we need to start working on its update as it's been committed in our NDC. What are we doing now? And this is our invitation. All of this that I said, we already have a consolidation thanks to this climate change bill. Just like the Paris Agreement considers a new instrument that will cater to many of the challenges that we heard about this external audit that we went through in our adaptation plan, that must build a framework that is common to all sectors that will allow us to make progress in addressing climate change. And in that sense, we have the long-term climate strategy in Chile that is currently undergoing the public consultation process. It's divided into 8 chapters. I'm not going to dwell on details, but please do participate in the citizens' participation process. But I'm going to tell you a little bit how this allows us to take these challenges that we were analyzing at the beginning of the presentation and take them to the fisheries sector so we can make progress in addressing climate change. The long-term strategy has a vision towards 2050 that is part of the Climate Change Framework Act, which is to achieve and for that, it establishes also fundamentals that are key to the whole climate policy that is developed in Chile. That is to say, also climate policy that is developed in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, that is led by the Undersecretariat of Fisheries, which deals with the coastal areas policies. We have climate governance that is established in our project. Cost effectiveness, how the condition that allows us to prioritize measures that are effective for mitigation and that have the lowest costs from the economic, environmental, and social points of view. Nature-based solutions that allow us to contribute both to mitigation as well as to adaptation that are key to a sector such as fisheries and aquaculture, which the scientific committee has given us significant contributions, and this social pillar that we discussed associated to the SDGs. All of these 4 pillars that are the sustainability pillars are based on science, and I should highlight the Observatory of Climate Change that has a lot of information that is useful to supplement decision-making. The long-term strategy has been developed through participatory processes, and we are right now in this process in light blue of citizens participation or consultation, in which you can access the webpage that I will refer to at the end. So you can give your opinion in terms of what is it that we are defining in this long-term climate change strategy. And what is it being defined? The sectoral contributions and the integration components in order to achieve these significant goals for the country. What is it that connects this with what we're saying today? The vision, objectives, and the goals of the fisheries and aquaculture, of the coastal areas, and the ocean sector. This strategy considers 319 goals that cover mitigation, adaptation, and that also are directly connected to the territories. As to adaptation, which is the topic at hand today, as we had been discussed, and as Doris said, adaptation is this planning process at the country level, at the regional level, and community level that will allow us to address the climate risks, both present and future, in which the risk atlas that Doris introduced and she told us what's included, it allows us to do this assessment of climate risk in order to identify the cost effectiveness criteria and to design the measures that must be implemented and then monitored and assessed from these indicators. This adaptation process to climate change, which is a continuous process, so it does require a lot of information. It also requires ongoing work and coordinated work with the different sectors. We saw this already in terms of the impacts of the fisheries and aquaculture sectors globally. We know that these changes have impacts that are actual and that are clear in terms of loss of diversity, disturbances, reduction of yields in fisheries, and the change in terms of the potential activities that we are conducting on both at the community level as well as industrially. And in that sense, I'm not going to dwell on details with the climate risk atlas. I just wanted to reinforce what Doris said, because here we provide this work that has been coordinated with researchers and the undersecretariats and the public sector institutions. This tool, which is a live platform with lots of information, but allows us to see for each territory what are the impacts and the risks associated to climate change for the different activities. Here, I'm showing some of the maps that are showing the potential risks, as Gladys said, are relative risks in the territories in terms of current future condition, mussels, growing mussels, mussels seed, then other species in the Los Lagos region. There's going to be blooming of deleterious algae and a reduction in the provision of fresh water, which will be impactful because we need to work from the point of view of adaptation in terms of how we reduce our exposure and how we reduce sensitivity, as Doris said. We know that artisanal fisheries by 2019 accounted for 55% of total fishing in Chile, and 16% of shoreline fishing is mostly implemented by women who play a very relevant role. So what is it that we can see here? We can see what are the impacts that are expected in the different fishermen coves, and we can see how we can reduce those risks by working on exposure as well as on sensitivity. This is the same map that Doris showed, and the specific risks in the different coves. What we have here is what we are promoting with this long-term strategy and all these national plans and sectorial adaptation plans so that we can make progress in concrete measures based on information. And what is it that the long-term strategy says about fishing and aquaculture? It has 7 objectives, each one with specific goals to make progress in achieving these objectives that are very much connected with what we saw with Doris at the beginning, which have to do with generating and providing scientific knowledge and information for climate change adaptation and the decision-making process in terms of the measures that need to be made, strengthening governance for adaptation of fishing and aquaculture to climate change, national, regional, and local level, strengthening the application of an ecosystemic approach to fishing and aquaculture. This is key. That's why we work in coordination with the Ministry of the Environment and led by the Undersecretariat of Fisheries. This is so important so that we can make progress in these objectives. I'm summarizing the SDGs that are connected with what we are contributing with these objectives and goals. Consider a comprehensive risk approach, as we heard from Doris in her presentation. This is not easy because there's a lot of information. It's very detailed. So we need to see each topic specifically in the different territories to make good decisions. And for that it's key to consider objective number 5 of strengthening participation, knowledge, and awareness of all the agents in the sector in the fishing and aquaculture communities, considering the gender approach, both in public and private instances, as well as in issues related to climate change, fostering diversification of the livelihoods of the communities that depend on fishing and aquaculture. We were provided very good tools and examples in terms of how we can promote a diversification of livelihoods and communities, and also to foster a sustainable, productive competition. And from that, with these objectives and the goals and the strategy, what we are committing in terms of adaptation is the development of indicators that consider both progress in the process that have to do with the implementation of the adaptation and regional and community plans, and also indicators that have to do with the results or effectiveness, very much in line with what Doris said, to look specifically at what are the challenges in the climate risk atlas and trying to lower exposure or sensitivity of the activities that are being developed in order to be able to lower the risk when facing climate change. I'm closing now with this long-term climate strategy, looking for all territories and sectors in the economy to introduce climate change in their daily management and medium and long-term plans, describing the guidelines for a future update of the fishing and aquaculture plan and the national climate change adaptation plan, as well as the regional and community programs. So this is the invitation to this huge opportunity we have. The citizens consultation process is still open. We have worked in collaboration with the Fisheries Undersecretary, so we will be expecting and we will answer each one of the observations that you can make in order to improve this instrument and to present it to the Framework Convention of the United Nations on Climate Change on COP26, so that it becomes the instrument that will tell us how we keep making progress in terms of climate change adaptation, specifically for fishing and aquaculture. So thank you very much, and for this excellent seminar.
Muchas gracias, Carolina, por esa.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for your comprehensive presentation. Moving on with the agenda, let me introduce José Zavala, the National Coordinator of the Coastal Marine Adaptation Project in Peru, who will share with us the advances in the process of adaptation to climate change in the Peruvian coastal marine ecosystem. José, welcome.
¿Está nuestro expositor?
Is
Sí,
Jose online? Good morning. Good morning, Jose. Thank you. Apologies.
por favor, ¿se ve la diapositiva? Buenos días con todos.
Can you see my slide? Good morning, everyone. Please
Buenos
go ahead.
días. En primer
Good
lugar,
morning once again.
reciban el saludo del Ministerio de
Greetings from the
Producción
Ministry of
Perú,
Production of
Instituto
Peru,
de
the,
Profonampe y el Fondo de
the
Adaptación.
IMARPE and Profonampe and the Adaptation Fund. I'm Jose Zavala. I'm the coordinator of the Coastal Marine Adaptation Project. I would like to thank
Los organizadores del evento
the
por
organizers
esta invitación.
for the
A
kind
continuación,
invitation.
voy a presentarles los
Let me
avances en el proceso de
introduce the
adaptación
progress in the adaptation process in the Coastal Marine Adaptation Project as part of the implementation of this project.
Este es el nombre completo del proyecto.
This is the full name, and the goal is to support the government of Peru in reduction of vulnerability of coastal communities to climate change impacts on marine coastal ecosystems and fishing resources. To meet this goal, we have four components.
Primero de ellos es
Number
la
one
implementación
is
de
the implementation of
intervenciones
interventions on pilot sites.
Segundo, la implementación de un modelo
Second, implementation of a modern, efficient surveillance and environmental prediction system. Number three, the management system for knowledge and generation of capabilities. And number four is management and regulation policies. The first two are responsible of the Instituto del Mar, and 3 and 4 are the responsibility of the Ministry of Production.
El proyecto, en principio,
The project
basa sus actividades en la identificación de
is
los
based on the
impactos
identification of impacts of climate change in the marine coastal ecosystem,
sector y producción pesquera,
such as stock and production, which are more vulnerable, an increase in the uncertainty in fishing performance, change in distribution of fisheries, more vulnerability of infrastructure and local populations, and the collapse of certain activities due to external events. Based on the identification, we identify a set of measures of adaptation, a set of actions, so to speak, which are realized and then summarized in the various products and tasks in each one of the four components, as I just mentioned. The project also has identified two areas of intervention, two scopes of intervention, which were selected as a function of the trends in surface temperature of the ocean in northern Peru. We have a site where the trends are towards warming, and in the central Peru, where is the opposite, the cooling trend. So in these two areas, we can have two differentiated scenarios where the results of the project aim at having lessons learned. In the northern section, between Cabo Blanco and Máncora, and the central area is Vegeta and Punta Salinas. In the first, we have four artisanal fishing communities, and 3 in the latter. The component number 1, it's probably the summary of the main activities of these interventions considered as adaptation measures. And as you can see, there are 7 adaptation measures or activities and products where the product is being implemented. The project began in 2018 and should be completed by next year, in 2022. These 7 activities have to do with the promotion of sustainable fishing gears, restoration of stocks and co-management, sustainable aquaculture, sustainable tourism, marketing of artisanal fisheries, certification and traceability, and the implementation of byproduct module implementation or treatment of wastes from fishing and aquaculture. These are some of the advances we have had in these activities, especially in components 1 and 2. For sustainable fishing gear, we've been working on in Huacho, in the Huacho pilot area, where we on the gill net improvement and coastal encircling net systems as to improve the performance of these gears. For Mancora, we've been implementing an experience with a group of fishermen on tuna, yellowfin tuna, using poles to diversify their fishing activities in this in the fishing activity of this resource. Yet another activity is implementation of repopulation of scallop in Huacho in the context of the recovery of ecosystems. It should be noted that this activity is within a natural protected area within the protective areas of islands and islets, and this is a stock of scallop with very low density today. So the idea is to recover, and at the same time, we're working on improving the current regulation measures of two fisheries in Mancora and in two fisheries in Huacho under the principles of the ecosystem approach. For aquaculture, we have two activities here. It's the implementation of aquaponic productive module. This is an activity, this is on the ground and divided into two stages. First is the implementation of the module in the IMARPE coastal laboratory, and then this is to be scaled up into a commercial module. One of the key aspects of this experience is that this activity will be managed by women at in Huacho pilot site. These are the wives or relatives of artisanal fishermen. This is in compliance with one of the goals of the project of considering the involvement of women in the economic activities of the intervention sites. And the other activity in Mancora and northern Peru is the implementation of oyster farming pilot plant. And the field activities are just beginning this month, but last year they worked on the identification of the sites of these farming experiences. Yet another activity already implemented as an adaptation measure as part of the productive diversification framework promoted as a project is the sustainable tourism with the artisanal fishing communities. Along with other activities, this has been done through consulting firms. And the main thing is the identification of tourist attractions, both in Mancora and Huacho, where we can work on some initiatives which have been identified, where we have the support and funding upon completion of the project, as well as the identification of mechanisms to provide for continuity and sustainability to this intervention. For instance, in northern Peru, the identification of this initiative with an association called Los Hijos del Viento This is a typical ancient old fishery using sails. Yet another initiative is a tourism boat association in Ñuro, and pearl production project, which is the farming of these resource with handcraft based on pearls. And El Huacho, where we were working on tourism activities, and work with Amarten, which is an association of women at Medio Mundo. Last year we had work with them. We began working with them, supporting them in virtual marketing and their handcraft work. One of the activities associated to the set of activities in this component one is the strengthening of marketing and pre-evaluation of conditions for certification. The goal is, with the fishing communities, is how to improve capabilities on marketing and how to work on the necessary conditions to enhance traceability and the commercial chain in these sites. Fisheries that have been selected and groups of fishermen that have been selected, with whom we've been working. Near the end of the project, the goal is to advance in traceability, improving capabilities, and identification of gaps to identify potential certification of fisheries in these sites. And the last activity of component one deals with waste management. These are modules for fishing and aquaculture waste management and generate products that will help within the framework of production diversification of fishing activities, that will help improving revenues of communities in these intervention areas. This is yet another activity focused on women, communities in northern and central Peru. And these are women, relatives, wives, daughters of artisanal fishermen. In component two, as I said, monitoring system has a much scientific and equipment approach. We've in 2019 we conducted baseline studies in both pilot sites by IMARPE. One of the main acquisitions are 3 gliders plus an additional glider that was already procured. We have 4 gliders already. These are submarine robots, underwater robots for recording of oceanographic parameters that will allow the satellite-based recording of from these gliders in a preset pattern. We even have a thesis work on the management of this information and how this information is linked to other activities we have in component 3, which has to do with early warning system on both those sites and a participatory monitoring system, which is also part of component 2. The SMAP is a participatory monitoring system, the SMAP. We already have a design of this monitoring system, which has had the peculiarity of being developed in the middle of a pandemic using the virtual tools. Yet we have had the commitment of artisanal fishermen, the main stakeholders of the civil society and authorities in order to have this design, which is being implemented as we speak. Also, as part of these research efforts, we have conducted studies on socio-ecological vulnerability to climate change in the artisanal fishery in Talara and the vulnerability of species. We have the implementation of 6 thesis work, which are about to be completed this year on subjects dealing with climate change on both sites of intervention of this project. And in closing,
en principio tenemos, por supuesto,
of
la
course,
pandemia nos
we
ha
have the pandemic,
generado
which
no
has
solamente
caused us not
retrasos en el
just a
proyecto,
delay in the
limitaciones
project,
en
serious
en la ejecución del
constraints
proyecto,
in the execution of the project,
sino que además nos ha permitido
but also
mirar o tener una mirada
has allowed us to
como un escenario de oportunidades para para
see it as an opportunity for the implementation of this project. When the project or the project design is aiming at developing or improving the adaptation capabilities of artisanal fishing communities, of course, we never thought of having a scenario such as the pandemic. But what we do know, what we do want is that having these results, so working on improving this adaptation capability, not only will allow for facing the impacts of climate change, but also the impacts of the pandemic, not only healthcare, but also the economic and social and environmental dimensions. Yet another element we have identified by the end of the project is improved governance, and this focus on the fact that the interventions of the project, or in the interventions, we have been working on sustainability mechanisms for these activities, so that not only we want to complete the activities successfully, but also we are aiming at setting the institutional arrangements between among communities, local authorities, national authorities, so that this intervention can have a continuity as required for the success of the implementation. And last but not least, especially as part of component number 3, which is managed by the Ministry of Production, we're working on articulation of the results of the project with the sectoral NDCs. That's 18 sectoral NDCs in fishing and aquaculture. This is an articulation which is part of a process. When designing the process, the NDCs were not formulated for fishing and aquaculture. And at present, actually last week, the National Plan of Adaptation to Climate Change has been approved, has been passed. So not only by the end of the project, but also for the rest of the project, we're making all the necessary efforts to find a way how the project results, the lessons learned of the project can be used to improve and apply and implement these contributions so that we can speed up processes, especially for the execution and implementation of this climate change adaptation plan in Peru. That's what I had for you today. Thank you once again for your kind invitation, and I will take all your questions when necessary. Thank you.
Agradecemos a José por su presentación, por compartir esta
Thank you,
experiencia.
Jose, for sharing your experience that is being developed in Peru. And now we're going to continue with presentation by Ruben Pinochet. He is a senior professional of Subpesca of the Undersecretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and he's going to talk about the strengthening of the adaptive capacity of the Chilean fisheries and aquaculture sector to climate change. Good morning, Ruben.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Es muy grato presentarles un
Good morning,
resumen.
everyone. It's a pleasure to share with you a summary of the results of this project, which we have worked on together with FAO and the Ministry of the Environment. It's important to point out that education and permanent training, productive diversification, and environmental services of the territories in the fishing coves, together with governance systems coordinated with local stakeholders, are part of the key actions to reduce the vulnerability of coastal communities to the consequences of climate change. Well, all starts with the diagnosis. We identified three key barriers that had to be overcome. The gap in institutional, purely sectoral, lack of coordination in order to understand and face the variability of climate change in fisheries and aquaculture. Limited experience and availabilities of technologies and application of good best practices in the fishing and aquaculture for adaptation to climate change, which will increase vulnerability of coastal communities, and the limitation of information and knowledge at a community level for a proper management of fishing and aquaculture resources given the expected impacts of climate change. But what are the solutions? In a joint work with local stakeholders, key barriers were identified that had to be overcome. The gap of the institutional purely sectoral approach and poorly contextualized with the territory was solved with the strengthening in institutional coordination, this being essential to lead and multiply adaptation actions in fisheries and aquaculture, especially at regional and local level. Technological resource management and capability gaps were solved through adaptation actions which were relevant to their territories and cultures, transforming threats and into opportunities, and knowledge and information flow gaps were addressed through knowledge transfer with coastal communities, establishing a common language, recognizing local knowledge that became virtuous cycles in the adaptation process. The project was executed by the Undersecretary of Fishing and the Ministry of Environment, implemented by FAO and financed by the Global Environment Fund, the GEF. Its purpose is to reduce vulnerability and increase adaptive capabilities to climate change in artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture. The selection of the pilot coves was based on a climate vulnerability study which defined 4 coastal communities representative of the Chilean coast from north to south, the Riquelme, Tongoy, Coliumo, and El Manzano Gualaihue. We have 4 components. Component 1 that addresses the strengthening of institutional capabilities in the areas of structure, coordination, and knowledge for the governance of sectoral adaptation at the central, regional, and municipal levels. In this context, artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture are now visible sectors within the regional climate change committees, the CODEX, led by the regional government, where they form an advisory committee on the subject and participate sectorally in the development of regional climate change action plans. At the local level, within the municipalities, the same approach was adopted, introducing climate change in the municipal environmental certification process and in the local environmental committees, thereby building capabilities to strengthen fisheries and aquaculture issues in local climate change action plans. Today, there is a critical mass of authorities, professionals, and public officials in the pilot regions, as well as fisherwomen trained in climate change who share a common language to understand the phenomenon of climate change, threats, risk, and especially in identifying adaptation actions to reduce climate vulnerability. Another fundamental aspect is to integrate fisheries, aquaculture, and climate change information into an easily accessible, interoperable, and useful platform for coastal communities and for governance at all levels. Information and knowledge are essential to improve decision making. As for the points on component number 2, we have the process of knowledge transfer and recognition of local knowledge with the communities, noting their interest in understanding the meaning of climate change and its consequences for fisheries and aquaculture, sharing their visions of the seashore. The involvement of women and men, boys, girls, and young people in participatory environmental monitoring generated a valuable exchange between local knowledge and the data recorded by the instruments to generate local information for community decision making. Both transfer processes contributed to raising awareness and empowering participants and their organizations about this planetary process that is affecting the ocean and its resources. As for the production diversification, adaptation to climate change translates into the territory and for the communities in the way in which we will face its consequences. Although each cove has different attributes and socio-cultural characteristics, there are common adaptation actions that will help reduce their vulnerability. The diversification of production and services is one of the tools available to coastal communities to strengthen their traditional livelihoods, and all of them are based on the nature of their environment, with the support of technology and management to enhance the value of their products, as well as solutions with and for people. In this context, a better understanding of the role of women within the fisheries and aquaculture value chains, as well as the need to develop interventions that consider their needs, resources, capabilities, and knowledge, were some of the key results of the project from a gender perspective. Small-scale aquaculture, we can mention that these activities can contribute significantly to the range of livelihood options. Resources that were previously only fished can now be farmed so that coves are more prepared, more adapted, less vulnerable, and where collaborative work is essential and basic to resilience. For the implementation of communication strategy, you can mention that communication actions are essential to raise awareness and empower coastal communities, regional and community authorities, and society in general. Media, mass media, field visits, exchange of experiences, publications, workshops are all key activities and products of the product that will help empowerment and later replicability in other coves of the country. For the material to continue replicating actions, these are some examples of the material that this project leaves us with to strengthen the scaling up and promote the replicability of these adaptation activities in artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture. So what are the sustainability challenges of practice and adaptation? So what do we envision for the future? The results obtained by the project are aligned with policies, plans, and programs aimed at the sustainability of artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture. We have institutional and governance capabilities to continue advancing, to persevere in education and training at all levels, to take ownership of the adaptation challenge, to scale and replicate adaptation actions to other coastal coves and communities, applying continuous improvement, monitoring, and evaluation of the process and its results. This project is a fundamental pillar in the process of updating the climate change adaptation plan for fisheries and aquaculture. Finally, some main ideas in closing our presentation. These projects fulfill its objectives and represented the beginning of a process that has just begun. We have sown seeds in these pilot coves in their communities, in their local and regional governments. We have shared lessons learned and harvested lessons to prepare and adapt to climate change in a coordinated and collaborative manner. Now, we must share these experiences with other coastal communities in Chile. We especially highlight the participation of women, together with men, actively participated in the implementation of effective solutions to increase economic benefit and create opportunities contributing to the reduction of vulnerability to climate change and artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture. As part of the project's sustainability plan, the consolidation of women's empowerment will be promoted through various initiatives and will encourage their participation in future productive, cultural, and social development projects in coastal communities. The joint work of the Undersecretary of Fishing, the Ministry of Environment, and all regional and community institutions will always be present to support adaptation actions and to develop sustainable and resilient artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture in face of climate change. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Rubén, por compartir esa
Thank you,
exposición.
Ruben, for sharing this presentation with us this morning. We'd like to thank you for the questions and remarks that we've received this morning. And we remind you that you can write down your questions, your remarks, and hopefully you let us know who you're addressing. Many people have done it, but I should remind you, though, that this is good in order to address them well during the Q&A. So we close this first segment of this seminar, and we're going to start the Q&A for the panelists of this first segment. This is going to be led by the head of Subpesca's Fisheries Development Division, Mr. Cristian Espinosa. Cristian, please be welcome. Good morning. Thank you, Camila. I'd like to greet you all. For example, also greet all those who are watching, especially in the pilot goals in Riquelme, Coliumo, Tongoy, El Manzano, Gualaihue, and all the artisanal fishermen and women who are watching this. We'd like to thank the greetings we've received through the chat box, greeting our colleagues from Guatemala, Ecuador, and from other countries that are also present. It is important, the stage at which this project is, it is about strengthening the adaptation capability in the fisheries and climate sector in Chile in the context of climate change. And the specific questions, let's check them. The first one for Doris. How do you measure clearly the change in the sea height? How is this going to affect the coastal areas of Chile? Is there a study about that? Thank you for the question. Really, I should have mentioned that in the climate risk atlas. There's a risk analysis about the impact of the sea level, extreme waves on the coastal areas, and that was developed by a group of the Patricio Winkler and his group at the Catholic University of Valparaiso. They did a very good assessment showing, for example, the frequency and the number of days in which fishermen could not operate because of surges and increased waves. I did not include that because it's an additional analysis, but the risk analysis due to marine ecosystem changes for fisheries and aquaculture, plus the physical impact, increased waves and surges, must be included. I believe in the coming stage, this type of analysis will be integrated, but the information is available, and this is an invitation to look at it in the same platform.
Doris, mira, hay
Thank
otra.
you, Doris. There's another question for you. Good morning. Considering the vulnerability of the country, Chile, do we have enough oceanographic stations to monitor the variables, and what is the impact of that on predictive models? Well, really, I should say that the risk analysis that we conducted involved the use of ground climatic stations. The analysis we did for aquaculture in inner sea or high sea for some of the sensitivity indicators and some of the buoys and oceanographic systems that observe surface sea water. But I believe that is a weakness. There is a weakness in the current reality. We do require an integrated ocean observation system, and there are several initiatives. And there's an initiative in this project. There are many projects that resort to the use of buoys. I've heard a lot about it, and there's some proposal before COP25. A group of researchers and scientists did, which is to have an integrated oceanographic observation system. Also, the buoys and platforms information can be integrated with the information that is captured by aquaculture. There's a huge amount of data that is produced in the case of salmon farming, and to connect with local monitoring systems. I understand the IFOP project as part of the HEPA project will be part of that, but I believe we need an integrated system and better coordinated system and very well connected to the local needs. Thank you, Doris.
Del país hermano, don José
I
Zavala.
think Mr. Jose Zavala can help us with this question. What would be the aquaculture and fisheries practices that are necessary in order to reduce the sensitivity, and to what extent that affects risk?
Sí, gracias. Gracias, Cristian.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Really, what we've been doing with the project, although it is at an initial preliminary stage, we should say that two aspects have been involved: how to improve the activities of cultures or farming in the sea, and on the other hand, how do we address possibilities, or we explore activities that have to do with aquaculture activities, but on the ground, on mainland, in which technical issues, environmental issues, and management issues even can be differentiated. Both ways of addressing this activity, the intent is to provide lessons learned so that these explorations can give us an idea of where we should make our efforts to address the reduction of the risks, and how this translates into management tools and mechanisms, governance mechanisms that are part of component number 4 in the hands of the Ministry of Development and Production, so we can materialize and we can make this type of interventions and options sustainable and continued. Thank you, Jose. I don't know if this same question, what would be the aquaculture and the fisheries practices needed to reduce sensitivity, and to what extent it affects the risk for Doris. I don't know if please, if you could take a minute. Yes, I somehow mentioned this. I believe all projects that are intended to address risk of fisheries and aquaculture facing climate change must start by proposing an idea of what is the conservation state or status of the fisheries resource, or the management status of aquaculture activity. Because if we're working with fisheries that are over with excessive catch, we run the risk of that species disappearing from the area because it's one forcing agent on top of another. So climate change should help us understand that it is important to be much more accountable for the way we manage resources. For example, hake in the south, illegal fishing of hake. We do not know when the hake stocks would be so dramatically affected that they could disappear. I'm being dramatic. Algae systems in the north, in Norte Chico, that could be quite sensitive to ocean acidification or increased temperature. So if there's overfishing of algae, that could mean the end of a part of that resource. So if we understand that we can fish less but add more value to the product, this is how we are building resilience already. So it is very important to strengthen that vision and that understanding among our growers and fishermen and women. That should start locally, I guess. Thank you, Doris. For Carolina Urmeneta, how are you connecting the information with the fishermen coves that were not part of the pilot projects? What is the time framework for that to happen? Thank you. It's a very good question because, in fact, that is what we are looking for with this work that Ruben was telling you about, what we do with the climate change committees regionally. We have regional committees in the 16 regions of our country, and also at the community level or municipality level, in the Ministry of Environment, we have the municipal certification system. At the highest levels of those systems, they deal with climate change, and therefore these examples that Ruben presented, that how these committees have been formed both regionally and subcommittees, as well as in the community committees, they are key so we can actually connect that with the community committees. For you to have an idea, those municipalities that are part of the certification system account for 72% of the municipalities. So we have a broad chance of actually reaching out to those municipalities, and these pilot projects with FAO are key so that we can connect with them. And those commitments are part of the long-term climate strategy. And though they mean that from the ministry, with the coordinated work with all the institutions of the public sector, ideally also with the support of the international organizations, will approach those municipalities that are part of the certification program so that we can also consider climate change issues. And what we have made with this project is the pilot that we needed in order to do it, at least for fisheries and aquaculture. So that is the connection. It is part of the long-term strategy, and you'll see that we hope that between 70 to 75% of the municipalities that are part of the system by 2030 already have climate change issues as part of their operation.
Muchas gracias, Carolina.
Thank you, Carolina.
Para Rubén, otra
For
consulta.
Ruben, another question. What were the tools to measure installed capacities in municipalities and fishermen coves? Well, first, a multidisciplinary team was formed, FAO specialists, together with the beneficiaries, to address and discuss their knowledge, their territorial qualifications in order to assess the situation and what are their capabilities in order to find solutions. Once that was defined, action plans were developed to get the best potential from the communities and fishermen coves, and to focus on the production initiatives as we have presented, not only in my proposal, but and also, and the question also helps me tell you that to continue with the replicability of these successful experiences, and the idea is to scale this up to the rest of the fishermen coves with a analysis of vulnerabilities,
Muchas gracias, Rubén.
Thank you, Ruben.
Hay una otra consulta, dice,
There's another question. There's a diagnostic
y evaluaron las distintas dimensiones
and assessment of the different dimensions of the social, economic, public project, and also political aspects. So it is a question, actually. It's- I don't know if you can answer.
se diagnosticaron y evaluaron las distintas dimensiones
Did you diagnose the different dimensions of this project? Economic, social, public, the status of the resources and political conditions?
¿En cuál de todos los proyectos nos están preguntando? Me imagino
In
que
what project? I believe,
en el fondo, mira, ¿qué es lo que se hizo y qué tiene la estrategia climática a
what
largo
was
plazo?
done and what is this long-term strategy all about? And this is connected with what Doris said in terms of sea surges and waves. I went through this very quickly. There's a slide with the content that I showed. In chapter number 7, this considers cost effectiveness. That shows the result of cost effectiveness for carbon neutrality. We did an assessment in order to see what is the cost effectiveness in Chile of changing this scenario in which we follow this scenario, and we change the curve, and we focus on carbon neutrality, which is an opportunity for Chile. And as to adaptation, what is in this chapter, long-term strategy, the cost of lack of action due to the impacts that are expected from climate change based on the risk atlas.
Asociado a
Those are costs of lack of action associated to the changes that are expected in this period between 2035 and 2065 in different fishermen coves and along the coastal areas of Chile. For example, costs of some ports because of sea surges, and some ports will have negative conditions because they have to reduce their operating hours. And there are several ports in Chile that have positive conditions because due to those conditions, because of a change of the ways, they will be able to change their operating hours. This also considers the costs of erosion on the beaches. And we see that the beaches will have of 12 meters of erosion will be reduced, and those are important costs. We go on vacation to the beach and there will be less possibility of visiting them, and those costs of inaction, what they're looking for and with mitigation is to compare them with what we know that is what Doris said. What do we need to do to reduce our exposure and to reduce sensitivity, and to be able to show that clearly to adopt these adaptation actions is beneficial for the country because the costs of inaction are quite high in terms of climate change costs and impacts. That's part of the long-term strategy. There are some examples. They're not all in detail there for all sectors. So what does the long-term strategy establish is that in the future update of the adaptation plan of the fisheries sector, there should be a determination of these costs of lack of action for the decision-making process of the measures that we need to prioritize and to develop. That is the line that we should follow. And another important, that is very important in terms of funding and projects, is that we, in Chile, there is an agreement about the recovery of the country. And that is a package of measures, funding measures that consider public funding. And in that sense, one part of that fund, part of that accounts for $4.5 billion. Out of those $4.5 billion, all projects must meet current environmental regulation, but they also, at least 30% of that fund that is for public investment is a fund that will contribute to accelerating our transition to this emission neutral development and climate resilient development. And there are several projects which are for improving coastal areas. very interesting projects that consider the climate change variable, and therefore we are facing an opportunity to take this opportunity of having access to this funding and to improve what is going on in fishermen coves and the coastal areas that can also benefit the communities that develop these projects, especially. So that's an opportunity that we should work together.
Muchas gracias, Carolina.
Thank you, Carolina.
Antonio Zavala,
For José Antonio Zavala,
¿cómo robustecer la
how to strengthen the public
privada
and private
para poder ir
articulation in order to adapt ourselves to climate change and mitigate the various consequences or phenomena?
Cristian, y gracias por
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for your question.
primero es entender
First, we need to understand that we're facing that the adaptation process it's a process. It's not. This is not a condition. It's not a status. Second of all, there's something that
hay un concepto, hay un enfoque que
there is a concept, an approach we have worked from the early stages of the project,
adaptación
namely the adaptation, especially in those areas and the communities we're working with,
no empieza con el proyecto
does not start with the project nor will end with the project. So there is a series of initiatives, experiences, articulations which are already in place that in some cases do not have this name, this label of adaptation measures. But in reality, that's what they are. So one of the main efforts, first efforts made was the identification of such initiatives, such organizations or articulations, for instance, at the level of local authorities, with the fishing communities or local authorities and regional governments and the regional and the central government, so that from those initiatives, from those early actions, how the project can strengthen, how our actions can strengthen and improve our initiatives and eventually provide or play or act as a catalyst for the implementation towards the ultimate goal, which is an articulation as a function of the implementation of adaptation measures. So the path, it's long. We are consolidating. One of the things I skipped in my presentation is that there are two important aspects of the project. There are certain original vulnerability studies supplemented by the Ministry of Production, and there is a project executed before the adaptation project that was funded by the World Bank, working with artisanal fishing communities and climate change adaptation issues, which lessons are being added and included in our activities. So this process-wide view allows us to identify actions from the local all the way up to the national level, and vice versa. One of the key elements we have guiding our processes and articulations is the linking of goals, of management tools that will allow for the implementation of these adaptation measures, either from the local level up to the national level. Thank you, José Antonio. This is for Doris, saying that there are several questions on the vulnerability matrix. Is it possible to know what was the multi-criteria matrix to define the coves to be worked on? That's the question for Doris. I I was involved in this project in the very early stages, and I don't remember this, but I believe that some of the elements is that in the coves had to be representative of geographic area. It was necessary to try to represent what happens along Chile. Yet another requirement was having information available. You cannot work in a cove where there is no information. Also, access so as to allow for the activities of the project. I mean, I know I don't really remember each and every one of the criterion, but let me say though, in supplementing some of the previous answers, that we did consider social and economic aspects. That is, we evaluated using the preliminary information that Cerna Pesca, as I said, has a database. When we first started the project, it was not as comprehensive as it is today, but still, to have an idea of the socio-economic condition of people, how many people are involved in fishing and aquaculture, how much dependence on it. So early in the project, we did have a preliminary analysis or a quick vulnerability analysis of the socio-ecology aspects, considering social, economic, governance, and biological and ecological aspects. And I mean, we are working on that. I've been working with the FAO on this and then the final analysis to see how the project actually helped reducing vulnerability. Of course, 4 years is a short period of time, but at least we can identify what components or vulnerabilities were mainly affected by the activities in their project. So I hope I am given a proper answer to the question. Thank you, Doris. What happens with the freshwater issue? Is a human consumption. The lack of fresh water will affect oceans and climate change. That's the first question. The second question is whether the small-scale aquaculture is a tool to strengthen livelihood of the farming of other species, for instance. The first question on fresh water is really important. And this has been referred to my colleagues, that fresh water into the sea is not lost, it's not wasted. Fresh water from rivers, from glaciers to fjords and the coastal area, and rainfall will contribute to generate a local oceanographic condition of salinity, which is key for the reproduction of certain organisms, especially, I would say, Region 8 South. Precipitation play a major role for many of the benthic species, particularly the inner seas. The fishing and aquaculture in Region 10, the south, is mostly influenced by this interaction between fresh water from precipitation, melting glaciers, and seawater, from especially in fjords. So we have fresh water is not wasted. It does have a key ecological effect. Fresh water can be very important also for some trout farming, for instance, small-scale trout farming from Region 6 down to Los Lagos. There are small initiatives of pan-sized trout farming, and availability of fresh water for this fish farming it's important, and very much influenced by climate change, because of the change in the use of soil. That again, the marine and terrestrial systems are connected. And whether small-scale aquaculture may be an adaptation mechanism, of course. I believe many researchers and organizations trust that small-scale aquaculture will develop, will grow stronger, and will grow diversified together with management areas. But we need to create to further the local market. There's a lot of work to do. But Piura chilensis, which is just filtering species, not only produce food but other ecosystemic uh, services. But we have to be resilient to climate change. But of course, they do contribute to as a mitigation measure. Thank you, Doris. Well, let me commend the women in artisanal fishing that play a huge role in this project. For instance, greetings to all of you from Soy La Bustamante with Conapach for the excellent seminar or webinar. And a question along the same lines. It's the view of artisanal fishing and a small-scale agriculture. As to the results of the implementation of those pilot plans in Chile, Ruben, could you take that question? We're already on time. It's within the time frame for questions. Thank you, Christian, and thank you for the question. Yes, our number one concern is the sustainability strategy. How we can push, we can drive this development required by these most vulnerable coves with an important female population. As an organization, and all our staff are very much concerned working on finding the funding and development projects which are necessary, which we know are urgently needed. People cannot wait due to climate change. We are in a pandemic situation, a difficult economic situation. We're dealing with the design with smart coves, implementing solar power, seawater desalination plants, recirculation tanks for a series of cultures and farming experiences. Other universities are developing economic instruments for biodiversity. We're working on the design of those solutions. Fishermen and fisherwomen need them now, and that's our main concern now. We also need budgets, which are being used, as we all know, for fighting the COVID. But rest assured that our authorities are very much aware on replicating and scaling up these initiatives. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Ruben. One last question, Karina. For Carolina, what will be the funding sources to scale up, update risk maps, and build an integrated monitoring system specifically for fishing and aquaculture? Any information about that? Thank you. The Atlas of Climate Risk is in the adaptation platform in the climate change framework law. And there's funding for the updating. We do need, though, that this law is passed in Congress. We are completing the first stage. Senators will vote this soon, so that we can go to the second stage of the process and we can have a climate change law, as it is the case in many other countries. Like Ruben said, it's urgent to have a legal framework that will secure the funding, the way so that Chile can establish these goals of carbon neutrality and resilience in a binding manner. So there is a clear funding source, but we do need the passing of these law. So that we can have this funding in order to update and continue to run this climate risk atlas that today is co-funded with the COP25 chair, German government, that gave us $1 million, and with the collaboration of science. And here, let me acknowledge over 100 scientists in this climate risk atlas, these huge tools that consolidates lots of information we already had in the various organizations and scientists in order to make it available, in order to improve our way to react to climate change. So that's the way, but we need that law. Thank you, Carolina.
Alguien por ahí de Caleta del Manzano,
From Caleta El Manzano says, please, El Manzano has been very successful for mussel farming. There's a link between the seed collection and the growing of the species. So I'd like to thank all the questions and the comments. Thank you, Camila. Thank you, Christian, for your wonderful chair of the question and answer. I'd like to thank the speakers, all the answers offered this morning. This is a really interesting topic for climate change, and we've come to realize this in this project. I'd like to thank you all for your questions and valuable comments through the social media. And this concludes the first part of this seminar. We'll have a 10-minute break and return shortly to begin the second part of this event. We will be sharing important information so that you stay tuned, because in 10 minutes we will be back. Thank you. We'll see you in a while.
For our oceans. The next 10 years represent a critical opportunity to accelerate international efforts and achieve the goal of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. That's why this year's State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture report is focused on sustainability in action. The report highlights major trends in global fisheries and aquaculture, and also scans the horizon for new and emerging strategies to better manage aquatic resources sustainably into the future. The sector is at the core of Sustainable Development Goal 14, which calls for the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Progress is being achieved, but challenges remain. While 65.8% of fish stocks are harvested sustainably, the remaining 34.2% are overfished. Fisheries management is therefore more crucial than ever. Totaling 179 million tons, fisheries alone reached 96.4 million tons, while aquaculture production reached 82.1 million tons, or even more if you include aquatic algae. This is good news for the billions of people who rely on fish as a primary source of protein, and the millions who earn their livelihood working in fisheries and aquaculture. Women play an important role in this labor force, especially in the post-harvest sector. Beyond the nutrition and employment benefits, fish has also become one of the most traded commodities in the world in recent decades, with developing countries taking on an increasingly important role in this arena. As such, fisheries and aquaculture have an indispensable function in society that we simply cannot take for granted. The world must work together to ensure that the generations to come can continue to access this vital source of nutrition and employment, especially as the population continues to grow and global production continues to intensify.
Muchos no saben que en la actualidad el sector pesquero artesanal es una de las áreas más vulnerables ante los impactos del cambio climático. El aumento de la temperatura del agua, fuertes y frecuentes marejadas, aumento del nivel del mar, tormentas e inundaciones, todo esto reduce la disponibilidad de especies marinas, lo que afecta a las comunidades que dependen de la extracción y venta de estos productos. Es ante esta situación que surge la necesidad de implementar medidas de adaptación al cambio climático en el sector pesquero artesanal y acuicultura de pequeña escala, para minimizar los impactos negativos que afectan la sostenibilidad, los niveles de ingresos y empleabilidad de las personas. Por esto, El proyecto Fortalecimiento de la Capacidad de Adaptación en el sector pesquero y acuícola chileno al cambio climático apunta a 3 cosas. 1. Fortalecer las capacidades institucionales públicas y privadas. 2. Mejorar la capacidad de adaptación de la pesca artesanal y la acuicultura de pequeña escala. Y 3. Fortalecer el conocimiento y sensibilización sobre el cambio climático en las comunidades pesqueras y acuícolas. En esta manera tendremos respuestas probadas de cómo enfrentar el cambio climático a través de fortalecimiento de la institucionalidad pública a nivel local, regional y nacional, programas de capacitación en la pesca y acuicultura, diversificación productiva y estrategias de turismo sustentable y la incorporación de valor agregado a productos pesqueros. Nuestro desafío es que las capacidades instaladas para enfrentar el cambio climático a través de los distintos programas impacten a nivel de la política pública y se sustentan en el tiempo y que se transformen en herramientas seguras para dar continuidad a las distintas iniciativas que impulsa el proyecto en las caletas pilotos de Riquelme, Tongoy, Coliumo y El Manzano de Gualeguay, y que además son un ejemplo a nivel nacional y un estímulo para que otros caletas del país también implementen medidas sustentables de adaptación al cambio climático.
Our oceans, lakes, and rivers are precious. We are at a turning point for our oceans. The next 10 years represent a critical opportunity to accelerate international efforts and achieve the goal of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. That's why this year's State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture report is focused on sustainability in action. The report highlights major trends in global fisheries and aquaculture and also scans the horizon for new and emerging strategies to better manage aquatic resources sustainably into the future. This sector is at the core of Sustainable Development Goal 14, which calls for the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Progress is being achieved, but challenges remain. While 65.8% of fish stocks are harvested sustainably, the remaining 34.2% are overfished. Fisheries management is therefore more crucial than ever. Totaling 179 million tons. Fisheries alone reached 96.4 million tons, while aquaculture production reached 82.1 million tons, or even more if you include aquatic algae. This is good news for the billions of people who rely on fish as a primary source of protein, and the millions who earn their livelihood working in fisheries and aquaculture. Women play an important role in this labour force, especially in the post-harvest sector. Beyond the nutrition and employment benefits, fish has also become one of the most traded commodities in the world in recent decades, with developing countries taking on an increasingly important role in this arena. As such, fisheries and aquaculture have an indispensable function in society that we simply cannot take for granted. The world must work together to ensure that the generations to come can continue to access this vital source of nutrition and employment, especially as the population continues to grow and global production continues to intensify.
Muchos no saben que en la actualidad el sector pesquero artesanal es una de las áreas más vulnerables ante los impactos del cambio climático. El aumento de la temperatura del agua, fuertes y frecuentes marejadas, aumento del nivel del mar, tormentas e inundaciones, todo esto reduce la disponibilidad de especies marinas, lo que afecta a las comunidades que dependen de la extracción y venta de estos productos. Es ante esta situación que surge la necesidad de implementar medidas de adaptación al cambio climático en el sector pesquero artesanal y acuicultura de pequeña escala. para minimizar los impactos negativos que afectan la sostenibilidad, los niveles de ingresos y empleabilidad de las personas. Por esto, el proyecto Fortalecimiento de la Capacidad de Adaptación en el sector pesquero y acuícola chileno al cambio climático apunta a 3 cosas. 1. Fortalecer las capacidades institucionales públicas y privadas. 2. Mejorar la capacidad de adaptación de la pesca artesanal y la acuicultura de pequeña escala. Y 3. Fortalecer el conocimiento y sensibilización sobre el cambio climático en las comunidades pesqueras y acuícolas. En esta manera tendremos respuestas probadas de cómo enfrentar el cambio climático a través de fortalecimiento de la institucionalidad pública a nivel local, regional y nacional, programas de capacitación en la pesca y acuicultura, diversificación productiva y estrategias de turismo sustentable y la incorporación de valor agregado a productos pesqueros. Nuestro desafío es que las capacidades instaladas para enfrentar el cambio climático a través de los distintos programas impacten a nivel de la política pública y se sustentan en el tiempo y que se transformen en herramientas seguras para dar continuidad a las distintas iniciativas que impulsa el proyecto en las caletas pilotos de Riquelme, Tongoy, Coliumo y El Manzano de Gualeguay, y que además son un ejemplo a nivel nacional y un estímulo para que otros caletas del país también implementen medidas sustentables de adaptación al cambio climático.
Muchas gracias por permanecer en línea, por reincorporarse a esta transmisión que estamos desarrollando.
Thank you for rejoining this webcast. We're going to resume the activities and we're going to invite the key players in this project to give us their testimonies about this project. They will participate through a video that we will present now.
He aquí el mar. El mar donde viene a estrellarse el olor de las ciudades, con su regazo lleno de barcas y peces y otras cosas alegres. Esas barcas que pescan a la orilla del cielo. Esos peces que escuchan cada rayo de luz. Esas algas con sueños seculares. Y esa ola que canta mejor que las otras. La salud del océano es crítica para el futuro de nuestro planeta. Sus corrientes regulan el clima. Sus microorganismos producen al menos la mitad del oxígeno.
For millions of people who depend on fisheries and aquaculture for their lives. However, climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution, and overfishing are threatening our ocean, and with that, the precious resources it provides us.
Los preciosos recursos que nos proporciona.
Chile has a high degree of vulnerability to this global phenomenon, and its effects threaten artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture the most. A sector that employs more than 200,000 people directly or indirectly, of which 24% are women. For many of them, this activity is their only source of income. To protect it and make it more sustainable is to care for the well-being and the future of the coming generations. This is why the country is implementing several initiatives to strengthen artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture, and to promote research and generation of knowledge on climate change, linked to these important socio-ecological systems.
vinculados a estos importantes sistemas
is the
socioecológicos.
project strengthening the adaptive capacity to climate change in the fisheries and aquaculture sector of Chile. It was managed by the Undersecretariat of Fisheries and Aquaculture and the Ministry of the Environment, and implemented by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The project was financed by the Global Environment Facility, and its main objective was to reduce the vulnerability and increase the capacity to adapt to climate change of artisanal fishers and small-scale aquaculture producers. To address this challenge, a climate change vulnerability study was carried out, which selected 4 coves in the north and south of the territory to implement a pilot. Caleta Riquelme in the Tarapacá region, Caleta Tongoy in the Coquimbo region, Caleta Coliumo in the Biobío region, and Caleta El Manzano, Hualaihue in the Los Lagos region. In these coastal areas, the project activities benefited more than 1,300 men and about 760 women. The project promoted adaptation measures to the new conditions generated by climate change, such as the lower availability of marine species for fishing and aquaculture, increase in sea temperature, and a greater frequency of extreme weather events such as El Niño and La Niña phenomena. Following an adaptation approach, the project promoted practices that added value to fishery products traditionally obtained from fisheries, thus diversifying productive activities and development alternatives. This is an example from the fishers of the Riquelme Cove, located in the center of the city of Iquique, who participated in an environmental monitoring training program to help them identify the best conditions to enhance their fishing activities and explore new opportunities in aquaculture. We monitored certain specific spots. Specifically with GPS, we were able to locate them. In addition, we measured salinity. We also measured oxygen. We also measured visibility with a disc, an X disc that you lower to a certain depth, and we look at visibility, both diving, octopus hunting, for example, as well as fishing. They are closely linked to changes in oxygen content and temperature. For example, at 14 degrees, the fish migrate. But at 18 degrees, we have an ideal temperature for work. And the second activity was growing, cultivation. This is an experimentation project with algae, with chicoria, to see if it adapts to this place and if it can be reproduced. The project also promoted a technique for smoking fish to give greater attraction and commercial value to the final product. I was motivated because I found it very interesting. Many women and some men participated. It was nice because well, they brought all the necessary implements, brought the fish, we salted it and gave us a recipe. I learned how to smoke fish. I still have the notebook with a written recipe for the smoking. You leave it for only 10 minutes in the brine. You take it out. You put it on paper and then on the plates. And then it goes to the oven. And that oven, well, it takes about 40 minutes. And then smoking is ready. It is a good product to sell. It is a good alternative. to then start doing it. We have the opportunities. Well, we need to look for a place to do it. This is what we lack. We lack space today. Well, in the future, I would like women to participate more, especially younger women, girls, daughters of fishermen should be included in programs and to learn other things. Another adaptation strategy developed by the project was the integration of women in aquaculture activities. In the Cove of Tongoy, covered with white sandy beaches and gentle surf, women are leading aquaculture cooperatives and exploring different ways to add value to products from oysters and abalone farming and scallops farming. We realized that oysters cannot just be sold on the pallet to eat them off the shell, but they can also have added value. And we wanted to understand how to add value. We did it. We made vacuum packaged oysters with cheese, with species, and it was super good. We are artisanal fishy women. We helped our husbands, uncles, and grandparents who were also fishermen. And we thought, why don't we have something of our own? And it was the opportunity that FAO, the regional government, and the Ministry of the Environment gave us that allows us to come together. And now we can be aquaculturists. So with this, we have the possibility of feeding our own homes, giving our children work, and transmitting the vision to our grandchildren. So it is a wonderful experience that we're going to continue. We're not going to leave it. It's going to be here with us. We are the happiest women in this cove. Relying on their experience and family traditions, these women now see aquaculture as having an export potential and a feasible alternative for future generations. We have a motto. We say nothing is impossible. In 5 years, we imagine a processing plant that will handle our own products, to take those products to Europe, Asia, and anywhere in the world, because this is a certified organic product with quality certification. We would also like to have an organic and sustainable washing plant that includes a circular economy and a garbage collection, since this is all organic. Even our garbage is declared organic, so we can take advantage of that kind of thing. So we see ourselves developing not only aquaculture, but also the byproducts of it, learning, innovating, and taking our experience and this entrepreneurship to the world. The project included capacity building on climate change, which enriched the knowledge that fishermen and fisherwomen have accumulated in their years of practice in the sea or at sea, adding empirical data and thus improving their decision-making. Now we can, if we have a drop of oxygen, or we had 2 days ago, because we have the data in our office on a screen that gives us the information almost in real time in our activity. That is very important, that growers must know what is going on or what could happen. And when we talk about climate change, I think we are experiencing it every single day, and thanks to support from FAO, we can have a feasibility project for a processing plant, so that our associates and our cooperative are not only just individual producers of meat, but possibly we should offer products. So the vision for the future has a huge potential, not only for this cooperative, but all the people related to the sea in this sector. Hidden among large cliffs and rocks on the coast of the Biobío region lies the Bay of Kelumo. Here, women and men with a long tradition of fisheries work towards new productive activities based on their local identity. I think that what the project has done is to try to diversify what was done before. For example, there's a group of seaweeds harvesters that make seaweed creams, young people who also make artisanal beer, smoked fish, so they now go beyond what is the typical here in Kelumo, which was to sell sea products. Now we are innovating in products that have a local identity. The smoking process lengthens their preservation by 5 times. When we vacuum seal them, they last much longer in the refrigerator. Chicoria, luga, and pelillo are the main types of seaweed harvested and marketed in Kelumo. But changes in the climate and the coastal ecosystem have dramatically reduced their availability, reducing the income of those dedicated to their collection. With the support of the project, the women of the Seaweed and Shore Harvesters Union took their first steps in the production of seaweed farming through aquaculture. This will allow them to have a secure supply of raw materials to diversify their products, giving added value to food and cosmetic products. It allows us to give a better added value to algae. We can get cleaner algae, which are on the surface of the water, if you see it. This allows us to harvest the algae ourselves, getting it on a boat and lifting the lines. And we take the algae we want and bring them to our shed, where we clean it and package it. We do have the knowledge, we know how to do things, we have experience in all of this. And we want to employ more people and to develop this, not only to the 46 women in the sector, but because there are so many families involved as well. I want to thank FAO, the Ministry of the Environment, the Undersecretary of Fisheries, and all the people who made this project possible. Another of the project's adaptation strategies was the installation of capacities to generate new employment activities based on tourism development in the area. The residents of Kelumo created businesses that rely on their local geography. Kelumo offers more than fishing. There's also diving, natural trails, trekking, products with a local identity, an important gastronomic offer. All of these activities together allow the people of Kelumo to have alternatives to better adapt to the effects of climate change. In the extreme, or the southernmost part of the country, is the El Manzano Cove, a small town with difficult access in the Walawé community, which is the gateway to the Chilean Patagonia. Around 400 people live there, and for the most part, they are dedicated to fisheries and shellfish and seaweed collection. In recent years, climatic variations reduced the availability of fish that were historically extracted in the sector, pushing the community to diversify their production. We approached this project because we are seeing situations and changes that we had never seen before. To give you an example, excessive rainfall, inexplicable things, like when we had to become mussel growers. We got to work on mussel catch because we realized that there was a decrease in the hake biomass, so we had to diversify, and we have realized that there are many changes practically every single year. We coordinated with the FAO team and with several organizations. We have neighborhood organizations, the local school, indigenous communities, unions, federations, zonal management groups. So this is a whole team that becomes more interested every day. And as I said before, we're finding solutions to the things we didn't know existed. The adaptation workshops and training sessions helped shellfish and seaweed collectors to implement new ways to market their products, including, for example, direct sales to the public. Do you want me to tell you the truth? What has caught my attention is the most that the authorities have been more present in the sector. That for us is really good. Is really good because in that way we face bad things that happen, and the authorities can experience what we live. I think we have learned to take better care of our products because before we delivered to suppliers and took everything we could from the sea, and now since we can sell directly to the public, we take only what we are going to sell and use that during the day. This has given added value to our products, and we have also moved towards taking care of our environment because we've been able to break through and care for our environment. Because we reuse the algae as fertilizers for our vegetables and potatoes, and this is sustainable for the environment and for the local grassland. With the pilot activities in these coasts, in the coastal zones of Chile, the strengthening the adaptive capacity to climate change in the fisheries and aquaculture sector of Chile closes a cycle, but leaves a pathway for the communities to scale up, generate new employment alternatives, and promote their local development. We have a great potential. I'm talking about artisanal fishing that today founds between 12 and 15 million scallops a year. That was unthinkable years ago. The natural production, according to studies in the 80s, would only yield 10 million scallops. That generates an economy, a circular economy, a domestic economy. There are fishermen who have abandoned fishing and are now dedicated 100% to aquaculture cultivation. Others do both. Others work in administrative issues or small and medium enterprises. I would like to invite you to come in 5 more years to do this interview again, and we will say that we were able to tell you we did it, and we're still here, and we're women. Most importantly, we're women. Climate change is a process that does not stop, and its effects only increase with the passage of time. It is urgent to promote initiatives that help people adapt to this new reality so that artisanal fisheries and small-scale aquaculture in Chile do not cease to exist. Because coastal communities that depend on the resources of the sea cannot wait.
Las comunidades costeras que dependen de los recursos del mar no pueden esperar.
Así es, las comunidades costeras
Yes, coastal communities cannot wait. That's our commitment, working with and for artisanal fisheries. We hope you have enjoyed this video clip, which shows the lessons learned and projections of artisanal fisheries in where this project was cited. I'd like to thank them for sharing with us their stories about this initiative. a warm greetings. Next, Freddy Bacache is the current mayor of the municipality of Walaihue and elected town councillor, who will give us his insight from the municipality on this project and its impacts on the community. Freddy, welcome. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm right now at the Walaihue in the Palena province, southern Chile, what we call the green Patagonia, or the Chilean Patagonia. Walaihue has nearly 100% of its population lives on the seashore, the coastline. The local population is around quite scattered, but it's around 9,000 inhabitants. Most of them live on seafood. These economy, this maritime subsistence economy has remained for generations, for many years. This we have seen this sea food is the have been and still are the prime source of food for the population, both at the domestic level as well as to obtain economic resources, as we saw in the video with some interviews and some realities. Seafood and fishing are then essential to local economy. That's the number one. Seafood is sold in the local market and also at Puerto Montt. Artisanal fishing, that's mainly in southern Hague, is marketed in a production chain that eventually goes to foreign markets such as Spain. In the last 10 years, there has been a considerable development in the farming of Mytilidae, or mussels, for the harvesting of mussel seed, the so-called mejillón. We seed is then sent for growth at Chiloé. However, this productive coexistence with seafood in many cases has been declining, changing. Given the scarcity of some products, as mentioned there, it's really surprising, it's really amazing, and it's more difficult to obtain today. It was easier before to collect them. Definitely, some products are actually disappearing from the seashore, and as a food for people and for marketing. So, what are the causes of this shortage of seafood? Why do some products disappear? What do people do to avoid their depletion, and what do they do to avoid their extinction? So within this context, we have the strengthening the adaptive capacity of the Chilean fishing and aquaculture sector to climate change, which has been very important for our town. For instance, the project which has been developed at El Manzano Cove, as shown there in the video, one of the coves of our community, to help our shore gatherers, our fishermen, to understand and appreciate, and as a municipality, based on direct experiences with their environment, that sea products today can also be affected by climate change, a situation that has already been experienced in our local and regional territory. Since the implementation of the project to this day, after the pandemic, the population of El Manzano Cove has understood that it's necessary, as Yolanda said, to protect marine products, and that the small-scale farming and other activities, such as special interest tourism, dealing with fishing and seafood in general, are really important. So a great seed has been sown in El Manzano Cove, raising awareness and educating on climate change, living install capacities in sea men and women, as well as in young people, because we've also worked with the rural school. We conducted seminars. I attended a really interesting one. We have lots of students from from the town to raise awareness on climate change. So the strengthening of public and private institutional capacities, which were enhanced with the project, has allowed, and I hope will continue to be, that the Walaiwe municipality is actually involved to strengthen the participation and development of productive organizations of the sea, to continue understanding and experiencing adaptation to climate change in our community. One of the effects of the municipality was that we were certified. We have a certification as a municipality for environmental issues. Tourism is much more valued in all the El Manzano. Let me thank Ministry of the Environment and FAO through Cecilia Godoy for all the work done, for all the installed capacity, the skills, that will allow us to deploy this throughout the municipality and as a town council. This has been an extremely important experience for us as a public sector and for our people at El Manzano Cove, and the different unions, neighbors, organizations, indigenous communities, and schools involved in the project. That's what I can share with you. Greetings and our thoughts from Walaiwe, Palena, a region of Los Lagos. Thank you. Thank you, Freddy, for your testimonial from El Manzano and Walaiwe. Onto the program, but be reminded that we have the YouTube channel for taking all your questions and comments. And then remember to say who you are asking. We will now on to the presentation by Paula Gonzalez. She's the Deputy Regional Environmental Secretary of the Tarapacá region, who will present on the importance of the results and sustainability of the project in the region. So, Paula, welcome. Good afternoon. Hi, Camila. Good afternoon. Thank you for your kind introduction. As I said, we'll be presenting. I'll be sharing my screen, by the way. This is the view of the public agencies. We'll be sharing our results, our implementation and development with this project. Let me know. Can you see my screen? Yes. Thank you. As I'm a professional of the Ministry of the Environment. I'm the regional secretary, acting regional secretary of the environment. So let me share with you the results and opportunities for this project at Caleta Riquelme Cove. This has been already mentioned, but let me remind you that this is within the framework of the work we do in the structuring of public policies. As Carolina Urmeneta mentioned before, we have a general framework on which is being discussed in Congress. Carolina mentioned that they were waiting for the approval of this law. We have citizens' involvement in the long-term climate change issues, and given our commitment as a Chile globally, we have different action plans and tools. As plus the Climate Change National Action Plan, we have 4 main lines: adaptation, mitigation, implementation, means, and management of climate change at the regional and local level. And from here, in adaptation, we produced and implemented the Climate Change Adaptation Plan, which is the framework, goals, and principles, the vulnerability of the different sectors, and we identified 9 priority sectors. And these we focused on the different structures. So at these, we 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 saw a reduction in availability and access to several sea species because of migration or relocation, increase in the sea level, increase in the swells and floods and other frequency and intensity of climate conditions such as El Niño and La Niña phenomena. So we will be working on the adaptation plan of this sector. The main goal is to strengthen the adaptation capability of the sector to changes, opportunities, and of climate change. Okay, we are effects, but we can also identify certain opportunities posed with these meteorological changes. But this adaptation plan has five main objectives to work on the implementation of a SUPESCA, a Ministry of the Environment project implemented by FAO and funded by GEF, which is reducing vulnerability and increasing the adaptation capacity to climate change through three components as introduced, but let me revisit them. First component is focused on the strengthening of public and private capabilities. The second is fishermen, small scale aquaculture. The beautiful videos on people and with people and showing people working on aquaculture, women basically in the various coves. And here we have different activities focused and executed in the different sites, in four sites, four coves. The smoked fish, as mentioned, identifying that the product it's not just seafood, fish, or shellfish, but we can add value to it and sell it in a more processed manner. And the third leg is the raising awareness among communities. The work we have done in the region is based on the regional governance of the Regional Committee on Climate Change. This committee is already implemented in the 16 regions in the country, but that's where regional authorities address the challenges to climate change. Our regional committee is quite peculiar. We've been working on the various topics, the various sectors of climate change effect as in different commissions, in different committees, so to speak. We have adaptation plans, but we also have different committees, and one of them is fishing and aquaculture, which has the work of this FAO project, but also a task force on El Niño and La Niña effects. So we merge these three discussions. We have intersectoral work where we strengthen the articulation among the various parts, both for the private sector. We have private businesses, unions, NGOs, public agencies working on this, and we discuss the programs and action plans into the future to us to implement these FAO projects, as well as all the lines dealing with climate change. Thus, these are our achievements. We put together this group in September 2018, 16 organizations, 9 public and 7 permanent guests from the private sector, people from different unions. We produced an operational protocol. We have a listing of members on this committee. We carry out the adaptation plan. We did the dissemination activities and worked on annual plans in this group. And we strengthen the work with this FAO project. We have participated in gastronomic exhibitions to promote consumption and added value of resources. These are the different stakeholders. We worked in a fishery certification seminar. This is a quality seal for our fishermen. We needed to discuss, to talk about climate change. Climate change, it's not a far distant topic. It's something that is here, that is right next to us, it's affecting us, and that we can also make a contribution, and we can also leverage some changes in our fisheries. So we have done several discussions with the communities in the shoreline. The Day of the Ocean, it's also an important day. We have also held seminars on both international as well as regional seminars or webinars. As I mentioned before, we have built public-private alliances. We built an alliance with Asimnot to do some housekeeping and cleaning and refurbishing of the Riquelme Cove. We implemented painting works so as to improve the view, a better look. This is the grand opening of this group. There's a very diverse work as a committee of fishing and aquaculture. The pandemic did not stop us. We'll continue to work and support our unions at the Caleta Riquelme Cove with the various public agencies, with the tourism, economics, and environment agencies. We built a fan page to display products. We built graphics with theme designs of the cove. We have a media plan, training for selling during the lockdown or quarantine period, having a delivery, and we showed them, we trained them on the assistance fund during the pandemic period. We also know that these swells, the strong swells, is difficult for artisanal fishermen. So we work on a contingency plan where we have some actions to face extreme environmental events as a result of climate change affecting the Tarapacá region artisanal fishing sector. And we have a working group for that. So with all that and the work in the Regional Committee on Climate Change and the Fishing Committee, we don't stop. We continue to work. Climate change is something that requires a comprehensive view that we can offer. We supply them with tools, and with that, we can now let them know that this is the key for adaptation. So this committee, articulating different agencies, advising the sectoral authorities, generates a discussion and analysis. We continue to work with them to provide support and liaison with the sustainability strategy. That's what I wanted to share with you, the environment under ministry, and in this committee of fishing and agriculture, chaired by Supesca at a regional level, with the different technical secretariats. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Paula, por esa excelente presentación.
Thank you, Paula, for that excellent presentation, your testimony in the development of this project that has taken place in the region. And we are going to receive once again, the Undersecretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture, who is going to present the projections of this project. Thank you, Camila. I will try to share my presentation.
Ahí está comenzando. Sí.
Okay.
Ya, ahora lo vamos a poner en presentación final. Bueno, agradecer.
I'd like to thank everyone for their testimonies and presentations, and also respecting the territories. I think something we have learned with everything that has gone lately, the territories are different, and that it is important to sit down, discuss, and look for alternatives. And we have learned a lot as a public institution, and we've been very motivated to address specific issues that this is what citizens are expecting from us, and the artisanal fishermen and women as well. I'd like to say that one of the important lessons of this project was to learn how to work as a community with the different public institutions. And I believe this is extremely valuable because people were able to share a common objective. We're able to share a dream, and that builds empathy, and we can go on as a soccer team to score a goal, like in this example I'm giving you. So first, I'd like to thank all the teams of the public institutions, Serna Pesca, the Ministry of the Environment, and the different territories that because we have been able to grow together and work together, and especially because we've been able to improve our adaptation capacity to climate change in a simple way, in a friendly way. It's not that you sit down and you read a book and you follow a recipe. It's not that. Second, we should highlight that this has been an unprecedented initiative in the country. It is always important to consider, and it's always important to consider some regions and some pilot examples, and the example of Riquelme in Tarapacá, the example of Tongoy, Coquimbo, Coliumo, and El Manzano are true laboratories with information that we will consider for the plans that we are using this year, that I'm going to cover in the coming slides. What's important, and I repeat it, is that we grew a lot, but we also strengthened public and private institution communication through training, through innovation, in technology investment, and supporting the different production diversification projects. It is also important to highlight the design of an interoperable communication system that helps us make information systematic. Something that is so important for communication. This is also a risk. So theme maps that introduce we need a vision, or we need a more or a friendlier expression, something that I've heard from several fishermen. They do not understand the way in which we present the information in different web pages or repositories. Maybe that is a challenge of actually communicating risk in a way that is easy in order to reach out to the different stakeholders. I'd like to thank GEF FAO, eternally grateful because implemented.
Nosotros como Subsecretaría de Pesca y Acuicultura creemos que tenemos que avanzar.
We believe we need to make progress. First, the capacity of communicating, of strengthening of the activities to build awareness and training. Um, this is not so materialized yet. The Escuela del Pescador, we want to be very honest, because at the end of the day, there are different stakeholders that receive the training. This access, some stakeholders have access to internet and Zoom, which will be maybe the easiest way of doing this. And we had never thought that we were going to use this. But there are others who do not have internet connection, who cannot connect to these systems. And in a time of pandemic, they're more isolated. So we've been trying to develop outreach efforts, so people who can actually support this process. For example, submitting a project to INDESPA. It is very difficult in O'Higgins, in Navidad locality, because many of the algae collectors are people who spend all day working, but they do not have internet. I saw it myself when I was there last week. So maybe many of them are part of the PRODEMO program, Cumpliendo un Sueño, which is to complete their primary or secondary education. So the training tools and the outreach tools must be different. That's a huge challenge. Unfortunately, it's not materialized yet, but I hope in the coming months you'll be able to see it, especially this community that was formed in this project. Secondly, we believe the Cove should be the location to make progress in the adaptation capacity to climate change. And we have several tools that are available now. The first one is the Cove's legislation that has not made significant progress because of different formalities, agreements are required in different unions. It is also important to consider. And so we have they should have a level of sharing. And what are the uses given to the territories? The key component is a shared territory, a community that lives in the territory, and then to agree what we're going to strengthen. Are we going to strengthen tourism? Are we going to strengthen added value activities, because fishing could be diversified from the different projects that are aligned with these projects. So it is important to listen to the people in the coast. And if it is possible to add a technology, great, through an online marketing system. That's why we strengthen the Conecta Caleta through INDESPA, so that isolated coves can start having connection. But this is not the core of the project. The key aspect is the territory and listening to the community, and to make a more efficient use of the territory, so that we can all be beneficiaries. So this connects activities. Today, the law has been approved in gender equality that recognizes all those activities that are connected to this value chain. So the world expands in Caleta Inteligente. And finally, the Crece Mujer initiatives in artisanal fisheries that has a gender focus. These are the initiatives. Escuela del Pescador, it is an initiative that is being developed as we speak. We run a survey with fishermen and women, and they said, we do not want long training sessions, but we want to focus, training sessions focus on our issues. They used to listen to fishermen and women. They tell us what they need. Sometimes we believe that give them a wetsuit is the best thing they need, and definitely it's not what they need as a critical item for their work. I believe we should start working from the base, from the people who are working out in the field. this is a gift FAU, such as the practical training handbook, the guide for facilitation, all the tourism strategies will be important to develop this Escuela del Pescador, which is not clear yet, is not so materialized. So inputs, these are inputs that will actually feed this initiative. So this is a first deliverable that will be used by our institution. Caleta Inteligente, Smart Cove. The products of this project are also, this is going to be important. These are strategies for each cove. They will be useful for those coves that have a tourism vocation. We are going to add what we have learned. We are developing a project to develop a pilot project in 4 coves with this Caleta Inteligente model. We're also conducting a bidding process to support the smart coves from the tourism point of view based on the experience in this project. So in summary, everything that has been built will be used for our signature project, which is Caleta Inteligente, through the different outputs of this project. And finally, Crece Mujer in artisanal fishing. We have had participation of women throughout this entire experience in the 4 pilot coves. We mapped the needs of women from the point of view of production, support, and small-scale aquaculture. So within DESPA, we have developed a support program for women who work in this industry, and we developed a very successful project, a small-scale aquaculture project. Many women submitted their information, and we hope that this reflects the results that they've achieved. We also introduced food safety and security through the development of micromodules to add value, and also climate change, adaptation, and resilience. Last week we had swell effects, and that meant that they lost some of the algae that were drying up. So we need to have a capacity to strengthen those places where they dry their algae, and to have sheltered spaces to protect from the swelling of the ocean. So resilience, understanding it as a capacity to know that this swelling will take place, means to take this experience and to strengthen and to care for our artisanal fishermen and women. We have more than 23,000 women in the RPA, an artisanal registry, with this new gender equality legislation that recognizes connected activities. We believe we are going to have 23,000 women more that are going to be connected with the different trades. I had the honor of meeting some of these women. There are many activities in the processing of the species that will gain value in aquaculture and fishing. Also from the point of view of the adaptation capacity, because many of them will have to strengthen certain activities depending on what happens in a cove related to climate change. It's important to know that 70% of women in this industry, both in aquaculture and fishing, are heads of their own homes. So anything that we invest on women in this sector will mean a direct benefit to their households and their life of quality. That's why we're going to insist, and we're really happy for this new legislation that will be enacted either this week or next. And we're developing 4 different projects with this beautiful logo, which is called Crece Mujer en la Pesca Artesanal, to foster production, training, using what you concluded in this project, training at different levels, work. I received just a report in a mobile work group developed in Antofagasta, and they discuss the situation of 7 coves, where they discuss with women. They say women, many of them are not part of their registry. So they're giving us information that we don't know. They do not have phone or internet connectivity. They don't have access to their cove. They need more radio equipment. They do not have basic utilities. They need waste management resources. So this is the first document that we received from a mobile work group with the involvement of all women in the sector. It is an element in what we're going to be able to do. And finally, recognizing these different trades, and because surf collectors, shore collectors, we met those groups that in the region of O'Higgins. We were able to see how this activity is an activity that is a legacy activity between generations. Daughters and mothers and granddaughters have shared the same trade. Really, we need to listen to their message because they have the wisdom. And finally, to tell you about this project, in terms of gender equality that has allowed us to make progress within DESPA with a specific line for women. And there you can see how we are at the Chinquiwe Foundation, where we are working on the added value with these micromodules in a small school managed by this foundation, where the small-scale collectors and fishery women can learn how to manage fish after the collection. If they want to develop entrepreneurship in canning fish or smoking fish, or how can you produce frozen or a canned food of good quality? They learn. This is validated by the health authority. It is important because the handbooks that you develop for this project will be extremely valuable for those women who would like to find out more about these production lines from different types of fish and shellfish. Everything is supplemented. This is not only an ecosystem in the sea, it's an ecosystem also involving us as public and private institutions and supporting the GEF and United Nations project through FAO. And always, I'd like to conclude this presentation telling you that the lessons are part of us as a cultural change as Subpesca, and we have a huge commitment to work on adaptation to climate change, especially because of what fishermen and fisherwomen ask us every single day. So our invitation and our lesson is to learn from them, because what's really important is that strategies should come from the people who know the territories. We will continue to work caring for biodiversity, multidisciplinary fashion, because fishermen and women require specific solutions. So everything that was created in this project, believe me, that our commitment is to apply to these 3 different lines, as well as to other areas in the field of fishing management in Chile. The result of this project are of great value to strengthen the fishing and aquaculture sector adaptation capabilities, and we are eternally thankful for the opportunity to participate. So a round of applause for all of you, because what you generated means a huge support to our management. So thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, subsecretaria. Así es, un aplauso para
Thank you very much, Undersecretary, for your presentation. I mean, and all of you, these collaborative efforts in private and public agencies. So thank you, Undersecretary, for sharing the projections that exist around this important project for coastal communities. We will immediately go on to review the questions and comments of our speakers. For that, Maritza Jadrijevic, she's the coordinator of the Climate Change Adaptation and Capabilities Area, the Climate Change Office, Ministry of the Environment. She will be chairing this instance. Good afternoon, Maritza. Welcome. You have to turn your microphone on, please. Good afternoon. Pleasure to see you, especially all the attendees in the social media. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your questions. I'd like to thank the speakers, authorities, and professionals that share with us the results of this project in such an illustrative way, as well as the video clip that shows the testimonials of how this project has benefit, has this fishermen and fisherwomen and seaweed collectors. This is the idea of what has been the dissemination of the projects. We have the view of the regions. Let me congratulate Paula for her presentation. I'd like to say that the video and the presentations will be uploaded to the fao.org/Americas webpage. And that's where all the material of the seminar will be uploaded. Luis Valdez is a diver from Caleta Riquelme, the chairperson and chair of the union. Likes to thank for the diversification and adaptation effort. There are some questions for the Alicia that I will be reading for you. How to strengthen the public-private articulation to continue to develop and implement these initiatives in other coves. That's one. And please answer that, and then I will ask you the other questions. Alicia. Thank you. I was writing down. Thank you. Strengthening the public-private actions. First, we have to work on trust, building trust with organizations. Remember, we're going through difficult times. There is a lack of trust in public organizations. We have to take that challenge and start working on empathy with our sectoral stakeholders. And we are not alone. We all win with the private world. So first, increase or build trust, to favor dialogue, and not be afraid of these alliances. At the end of the day, artisanal fisheries will win at the end of the day. There are important initiatives in fishery. We're going through challenging times in this sort of polarization in the industrial and artisanal fishing. We have seen alliances in integrated fishing in Coquimbo, industrial and artisanal fishery, very successful, and Bio Bio in northern Chile, and Magallanes with salmon farming. So good experiences, I believe, are to be supplemented, are to be disseminated. So in summary, trust, are willing to build these alliances, communicate them and sharing them. That'll be, I would say, it's the secret. It's the big secret. Thank you. There are 3 more questions for you. What's the importance of production diversification to face climate change? Is it possible to open a budget breakdown in order to fund adaptation projects at a local level for the artisanal aquaculture, small-scale aquaculture, to face threats of climate change? And INDESPA, can INDESPA build agreements with municipalities? Is there a legal alternative to strengthen the local dimension? Are you thinking of this possibility? Yes, Maritza, INDESPA can build alliances. In fact, there are several alliances with universities. I believe the alliance with the basic unit, the regional or local municipalities, it's amazing. The fishing office are very motivated Now, production diversification is one of the strategic lines of INDESPA. Food security, safety on board, and production diversification. That's what we should encourage using INDESPA projects, for instance, strengthening the cove regulations. We cannot waste a huge effort we made there. That helps. The polygons help with the training on small-scale aquaculture in northern coves, where we have seen that when there are some bad periods, people do something else. Why not thinking of a sea-land alliance? The ancient practices we had when we had to take care of the seaweed, we would work on garlic or other agricultural activities. So production diversification is a strategic line at INDESPA. And yes, we can apply through small-scale aquaculture projects, adding value. I mean, yes, that's part of it. And when do you visit the coves? They're all waiting for you. Well, I believe those the pilot coves last week. I went with we toured around 10 coves in 10 days. Antofagasta, some 8 coves. So yes, we haven't been to Riquelme. We have been to Coquimbo. So yeah, in the coming days we will go there and we'll go to Magallanes, Aysén, and back to Antofagasta. So we will be there. We fully agree. Yeah, we have to be on site. The best part as being as an undersecretary, just arriving from Bucalemu, Pichilemu, where we have seen a reality that I had never seen before. So yes, we will be there. We will be visiting them. Thank you. I have here a commendation from the attendees, the communities, men and women involved in this initiative. We can see all the work done at these coves, and there is a commendation for them. Paula Gonzalez, how can we support and scale up these pilot projects through the CORE, through the regional committees? Thank you, Maritza. Well, the articulation, the private and INDESPA stakeholders in the Commission allows us to find the additional funding to scale up and replicate what we have done at the Caleta Riquelme, the Riquelme Cove. That's one of the main actions, as the Undersecretary mentioned. First, we have to show that this is possible, that they can actually work, that there are the tools available, and that they are being successful. That means we can involve other sectors, the private sector, in support of these initiatives. Thank you. I have a question for the Mr. Freddy Bacache, the mayor of Walawe. What is as a member of the new municipal management or administration, how do you see the implementation of the new actions into climate change? Freddy, are you still there?
Está conectado, pero no se ve. No sé.
Freddy is in the session, but can't see him. Well, I don't know. Probably he had a connection issue, but can't see him now. Those were the questions we had for this block and for this section. So back to Camila. Thank you, Maritza, for leading this Q&A in this second half. And we will invite the FAO representative in Chile, Ms. Eve Crowley, who will offer closing remarks. Thank you. The projects are financed with the Global Environment Fund strengthen the capabilities of the countries to comply with their commitments to the UN conventions. It is expected that the state will now include the lessons learned from this project, for instance, in the update of climate change adaptation plan for fisheries aquaculture. It will also be important to establish regional and local plans for adaptation to climate change, an initiative that has already begun in the Los Lagos region. We've also worked with the government of Chile on a strategy for disseminating the adaptation actions implemented. It should be included in public policies and programs for artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture. As we have seen, thanks to the project, we had the opportunity to implement important actions in our 4 pilot coves. But we must not forget there are almost 500 coves between Arica and Parinacota region and the Magallanes region. It is necessary to continue the process to reach each and every one of them. It is necessary to continue the process of adaptation and training of people and communities involved in artisanal fishing and small-scale aquaculture. These through education, training, technology, diversification, and value-added products, among many other actions. It is essential to scale up adaptation actions in the pilot coves for the benefit of all coastal communities in Chile, and to give sustainability to this initiative beyond its end date. Climate change does not have an end date. Much on the contrary, it continues to advance without limits, without pause. And it is in our hands to preserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and their marine resources, which is also part of the SDG 14. Finally, Alicia's presentation is a clear demonstration of the government committed to follow up for lessons learned, findings, and recommendations of these projects, and to guarantee that these are leverage for programs, policies, and trainings. Thank you, Alicia, once again for this big commitment. Finally, I would like to thank once again all those who have been involved in this project, national, regional, and local authorities, professional teams, project area technicians, municipalities, universities, schools, students, teachers, fishermen, fisherwomen, and aquacultures, culturers, who with great commitment and effort have supported each of the activities in the coves. Many of them promoters of capabilities and best practices as key tools for adaptation to climate change in the coastal communities of Chile. It has been an honor working with you. It has been a pioneer project for Chile, I believe, and in a way for FAO. We have learned a lot with you, so thank you so very much, and we will continue working together. Thank you for those closing remarks of the FAO representative in Chile, Eve Crowley. We'd like to extend our gratitude to all those who have participated and shared with us in this fruitful day, and of course, all the coastal communities which were involved in this project, well, which is very important for the whole country. Good afternoon, and we will see you another time. Thank you.